These allergic reactions may occur. Tremfya may...
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good morning, everyone. We're coming on the air with breaking news. We have just received word of a decision in one of the most consequential cases before the Supreme Court in decades. The justices have reached a final ruling on the Mississippi abortion law that prohibits nearly all abortions after 15 weeks and directly challenges Roe v. Wade. Let's go right to NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete?
Lester, in this historic decision, the Supreme Court has now overturned Roe v. Wade. Overturned Roe v. Wade and the follow-on case called Casey, in which the abortion right was made nationwide. Those two rulings stood for the proposition that states could not ban abortion before the age of viability. They could restrict it during that period up to about 23 weeks, but they couldn't ban it. Now the Supreme Court has taken that guarantee away. Lester, this is the first time the Supreme Court has ever granted a constitutional right, which it did so when Roe was decided in 1973, and then took it away, a popular right that was widely recognized. So the immediate effect of this will be to uphold a Mississippi law that would ban abortion after 15 weeks. But this also now means that in roughly half the country, abortion is, as of now, or soon will be, illegal. 13 states have what are called trigger laws that were intended to make abortion illegal in those states once the Supreme Court reached this decision. In a few of those states, the law takes effect immediately. In some, they have to wait for the state attorney general to certify that this is what the Supreme Court has done. That's 13 states in which abortion will shortly be illegal. And in the rest of the, up to about half the states, they are expected soon to make it illegal. So we're about to become a divided country, Lester, where abortion is legal in about half the states, illegal in half the states. This is a 6-3 decision. It's written by Samuel Alito. We haven't had a chance to track it yet, but you may recall that Justice Alito was the author of the draft opinion that leaked in May that suggested that the Supreme Court was going to overturn Roe v. Wade. But Lester, I have to say this is not, while it is certainly going to be surprising to some, pleasing to others that have worked for this day for many years, it can't be too much of a surprise for three reasons. First of all, the fact that the court agreed to take this case in the first place. This was a decision from lower courts that said, no, you can't strike down abortion that early because it would go against Supreme Court precedents. There was no division among the circuit courts. So why did the Supreme Court take it? The logical conclusion has to be that they took it to overturn Roe. Secondly, what they did in the Texas case when they allowed the Texas law to go into effect that would restrict abortion. And third, the comments that the justices made when the Roe v. Wade case was argued. So Supreme Court overturning Roe, this is one of the most significant historic decisions in modern times, Lester, and now it means that abortion is no longer the law of the land. It's up to the states, and it's about to become illegal in about half of them, Lester.
And Pete, as we watch the emotion, the reaction outside the Supreme Court, let me continue to talk to you about this. You have noted, I think as recently as yesterday, this supermajority at the Supreme Court now really flexing its muscles.
So does he not join that part? Does he dissent from that part?
Okay, Pete, obviously getting some late information. The ruling just coming down just a few minutes ago. A lot to go through, but you can see some of the emotional reaction outside the Supreme Court. The fences have been in place there for a number of days in anticipation of a reaction to this or any other of the decisions handed down this week. Let me go to Maura Barrett right now. She is with the crowds gathered outside the court. Maura?
Lester, tension has been building here between protesters who are both for and against abortion rights this morning. I want to bring you into the crowd with me. As you can see, members who are against the right to an abortion, they were just kneeling down, praying. You can see women crying, tears of joy. They said that this is a huge relief and a huge step forward for what they call the right to human life. I want to also note, we saw Marjorie Taylor Greene also walk into the crowd just over my shoulder, just over here. here, she was also praying with protesters, celebrating the decision. And though I do want to paint a picture, just before the decision came down, there was a police presence here. They had established a police line between both groups of protesters, and then about 5 to 10 minutes before we expected the next decision to be released, the police left the area. And so prior to that, we did see about an even divide of both protesters who are for and against the right to an abortion, almost to the context in which NBC polling showed that Americans support the legalization of or support abortion rights that are against it. And so even though this is a smaller group, a smaller representation of Americans, it was an interesting picture to be painted. But because of the lack of police presence here, it has become a very chaotic situation. But right after the decision came down, we did see this group of people who are against the right to an abortion jumping up and down, extremely excited about what they saw today. And then on the flip side, talking to people that were looking to see the right to an abortion protected. One woman saying that she felt like she knew this was coming, but it still felt like an absolute gut punch. Going on to say, she told me in tears that she was very concerned about the fact that women will still be seeking abortions, but they might not be able to get one safely. Lester.
Yeah, the reactions we see there being mirrored likely across the country as news begins to filter out of the Supreme Court ruling in a Mississippi abortion case, but essentially ruling overturning Roe v. Wade, a major decision we have been braced for as every few days more rulings come out from the court. We want to go to our NBC News senior Washington correspondent, Hallie Jackson now. Hallie, walk us through what this means in terms of, the differences between states right now based on this ruling.
Right. This idea that, as Pete referenced, we are now entering what is essentially a divided nation when it comes to abortion access and abortion rights in this country. So let's talk about the practicalities here, right? Remember that before today, Roe protected abortions at least through viability. So that's when a fetus can survive outside the womb. That's generally thought to be around 24 weeks. That's that viability line, essentially. And while today's Supreme Court decision was specifically about this case in Mississippi, because of what we are seeing now, what Pete is reporting on and what we've seen from the justices, this is going to have a big impact in about half the states. So nearly right away, you're going to see 13 states put in place these so-called trigger laws. Those ban nearly all abortions. Some of these laws have no exceptions for rape or incest. Now, these laws were specifically passed by the states on your screen here to go into effect for this exact instance, if and when the possibility arose from the Supreme Court that Roe would be overturned. That's what we're seeing now. Even Mississippi, which in today's case was fighting for a ban after 15 weeks, has a trigger law prohibiting abortions altogether. So then you take the next bucket of states, 10 states at least, that will severely restrict abortions. They would restrict them after 20 weeks to as few as 6 weeks, in that range. Ohio and Georgia are two states with 6-week bans that have been blocked in court. You are likely going to see abortion opponents seek the enforcement of those laws. So if you're a woman who is looking for an abortion, the states you see here in blue, those are states where abortion will probably remain legal, at least through viability. If you are a woman who does not live in one of those states, that would create a hardship if you cannot travel, for example. That is a point that abortion rights advocates have made. Take, for example, a woman who lives in McAllen, Texas here. She'd have to drive 11.5 hours to the nearest clinic in southern New Mexico. And even so, with some states barely holding on to Democratic control of their legislatures, remember what we have coming up in November, Lester, the midterms, right? Election day could mean a switch in some of these states from abortion accessibility to an outright ban, essentially.
Yeah, Hallie, we feel like we've been here already since it was May that draft opinion was leaked, and there was a reaction much like you're seeing right now. So are there any surprises here, anything that you're seeing differently than what we anticipated in May?
I think the question for me is what else we're going to see outside the Supreme Court throughout the course of the day and over the weekend, because you're right, when this draft opinion was leaked about a month and a half ago, that is when the nation essentially got the impression that a majority of justices were prepared to overturn Roe versus Wade, which is exactly what we are seeing here. What I'm looking for, and I know that Pete and his team are working on this, is how much is today's decision reflective of what was leaked, how many changes were made in those interim, let's say, 6 weeks, if any. That is one of the things we're looking for. We're also going to be looking for reactions from some of these blue states that are now, and I've spoken with some folks in those states who say they understand that they are becoming a haven now for women who will seek abortion access, now that it's become harder for women in roughly half the states. This is undeniably, Lester, and it is an understatement to even say it, a blow to abortion rights advocates who have been bracing for this moment, really even before that leaked draft opinion, ever since the Supreme Court did get that conservative supermajority with the appointment, of course, of former President Trump's justices on the court. It was anticipated this moment could come. The other thing to look for, and I know you'll talk to folks on Capitol Hill, but what's going to happen on the federal level? What, if anything, does Congress have the ability and, frankly, the willpower to do to shore up federal abortion rights protections for people in this country?
All right, Hallie, we will continue to talk to you, but let's go back to Pete Williams. Pete, you've had a bit more time to digest this ruling. What can you tell us?
Okay, a couple of things here, Lester. First of all, number one, this is a 5-4 decision on overturning Roe and Casey. Because Chief Justice John Roberts did not join that part of the decision. He said that goes too far. It's 6-3 on upholding the Mississippi law, which, of course, is what brought this case to the Supreme Court in the first place. Mississippi's law that would ban abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. And you may recall that Chief Justice Roberts, during the oral argument, was trying to find a middle ground, trying to see if there was a way to uphold the Mississippi law without overturning Roe. So he doesn't join the majority opinion. So it's 5-4 on overturning Roe, 6-3 on upholding the Mississippi law. Secondly, Lester, just based on a quick look at this does seem to very closely track the first draft of this decision that, as you recall, was leaked in May, written by Justice Alito, who writes this majority opinion. It makes the same kind of arguments against Roe that were made in that draft opinion. So it doesn't appear that it has changed a lot in the last, well, that draft opinion was actually dated in February. It doesn't look like this has changed a lot since then, but we'll know for sure when we go through it. But among the things that are still in it is this. He says, to ensure that our decision is not misunderstood, we emphasize our decision concerns the constitutional right to abortion and no other right. Nothing in this opinion should be understood to cast doubt on precedents that don't concern abortion. Because there were many people who were saying, well, if the logic of the Supreme Court is that you can't have a constitutional right unless it's deeply rooted in the nation's history and tradition and a concept of ordered liberty, then that casts doubt on decisions like same-sex marriage, the right to contraception, and so forth. Alito says, no, it doesn't.
Let me ask you, Pete, the fact that Roberts didn't go along with this, does that speak to a change going forward in how this court operates?
Well, it didn't yesterday on the gun question. He was fully along with the majority on the meaning of the Second Amendment, providing a right to have a gun outside the home for self-defense. But yes, it does. I mean, we saw it last term as sort of 3-3-3. 3 of the most conservative justices, 3 in the middle, and the 3 liberals. That's changed this term, but Roberts is not fully on board with some of the most conservative positions the court is taking. We've seen that in some previous decisions, and we certainly see it most dramatically illustrated in this case.
All right, Pete, stay with us right now. Also with us is Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, an organization that aims to end abortion in the U.S. Can you give us your first reaction to this ruling and what you've seen?
Yes, it's the culmination of almost 50 years of work. Back then, 50 years ago, every single pro-life law was wiped off the books in all 50 states. It was the court saying, we don't care what your opinion is on this deeply moral and difficult position. Today, the court has reversed that decision, saying, yes, what the people care about does matter, and it should be allowed to make its way into the law. That is how democracy works in our nation. And the reason that it has been so divisive, so difficult for almost 50 years, building in difficulty, is because that has not been allowed to happen. So today is a day of hope and certainly a day of celebration for the pro-life movement. And we will stay focused exactly as we always have been, and that is saving every life and serving every woman.
Does this end it for anti-abortion efforts, or is there a next goal here?
Oh, no, this is just the beginning. We've been waiting to open the door for 50 years. Now that the door is open, we go to every state and the Congress and the territories and make sure that we are doing all we can to be as ambitious for women and unborn children in the law, and that we're serving them at every step along the way.
As we have noted, this decision was telegraphed a few months ago, that draft leaked opinion. When you saw that, did you anticipate that that would be what we would see today, or were you concerned that something may change along the way?
Well, we were certainly hoping that it was. We thought that it was probably leaked so that it would put pressure on Roberts, that there would be a lot of violence and civil unrest based on the leak, that it would put pressure on the court to do something different. So that was certainly a concern. But I think it had the opposite reaction, which is perhaps just cement some of those decisions. But basically, those decisions were made in terms of the text and history of the Constitution, not on what is happening in front of justices' homes or the firebombing of pregnancy care centers. That did not work, and that is a vote yes for democracy. And I think that we will see this as something really important as we move ahead in trying to depolarize this world.
Abortion rights supporters will now likely look to Congress. What do you anticipate could happen there?
Well, what I see first, and what I've been working on with our allies in the movement for many months, is movement in the states. Right away, there will be pre-Roe bans on the books, say at 15 weeks, 20 weeks from conception, and trigger laws that will allow laws to go into effect in about 16 states or so. And then there'll be battlegrounds where there's great hope and possibility for unborn children and their moms in other states. The reality on the federal level is that we have a lot of work to do. Over the last several election cycles, we've had votes on the 20-week pain-capable bill in the Senate, and it's barely gotten a majority, and it certainly hasn't gotten a filibuster-proof majority. So we have a lot of work to do there, and it will certainly be in the center of midterms, and in a way that will advantage our pro-life candidates all over the country, especially U.S. senators and governors and House members looking to take over the House and the Senate.
Marjorie Felser, thank you for your time and being with us. Joining us now is NBC News political director and Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd. Chuck, you heard part of the conversation there about what may happen in Congress. Characterize this day, what it means, and what happens next.
Well, I mean, we are already in a very polarized political climate. We are we've been in the middle of a massive social disruption thanks to the pandemic. This is not going to sort of calm the waters. We are a divided country. This is going to divide us more. I think this is going to, if it's possible to supercharge polarization in this country, this will do that. I think you will see this sort of animate the left in ways we've not seen them animated before when it came to the judiciary and the Supreme Court. This has been one of the concrete ways that Republicans have been able to get out the vote and fire up their base over the years is this moment, this goal. They got it. So now the question I'm watching here is, does this flip the debate? Right? For years, when it became legal, the entire conversation became about, okay, what are the limits? And now that essentially the Supreme Court is saying you can make it illegal, the question's going to be, what else is next? You asked the head of the Susan B. Anthony, the pro-life organization, what was next. She was focused more on states. She talked about passing a federal law of 20 weeks. She didn't bring up contraception, but I promise you those on the left are going to be worried about that, concerned about that. There are some that have talked about the issue of contraception. You're going to hear a lot more talk about the so-called abortion pill. And I think you're going to see a lot of challenges on that. Some trying to make it illegal. The Biden administration, I think, is going to do its best to try to find ways to get access to that pill and make that easier. But I think that it is going to certainly supercharge the midterm conversation in certain places, not in every state. So in a couple of states, Michigan and Wisconsin, those are probably the two states that I would say politically will be ground zero for this debate, because both of those states have immediate bans that are now going to be triggered within the next couple of days. So who is governor, who controls the legislature, will matter a lot on the future of women's rights in those two states.
All right, Chuck, stay with me. I want to bring into the conversation NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, talk about how this could affect the midterms and change the general political debate.
Well, this is a sea change in abortion access to women across this country for generations. This really does bring abortion to the center of the midterm election, to the center of the conversation. There were women who I've talked to on the ground in places like Louisiana and Mississippi who are now going to have to drive hours and hours for abortion access. Those women, when I was talking to them, they were not focused on abortion. They didn't even realize that abortion rights were possibly something that could be taken away. But now this focuses their minds on that and focuses their minds on sort of what the conservative movement has accomplished. The NAACP is out with a statement calling this an egregious decision. We should note that 1 in 4 women in this country by the age of 45 have had an abortion. 60% of Americans, and in the latest NBC News poll, say that they want abortion access to be legal in this country in some form. That being said, the conservative majority, of course, has made it very clear that this is going to be something that they're going to be sticking by. And this decision is really seen as devastating to so many women across this country for people who are, of course, advocates of abortion rights. I also sat down with Shannon Brewer, who is the director of the Women's Health Organization in Mississippi. That's the clinic that is at the center of this decision. She told me that she believes women's lives are going to be put at risk now because they're going to be forced into unsafe abortions, or they're going to be forced to have children that they do not want to have and that they have not planned for. She tells me that she's going to be moving this clinic, again, this clinic at the center of this case. She's saying now that they're going to have to close their doors and that they would be moving to New Mexico. That's going to be the case in Louisiana and so many other states that are part of this 26 states that the Guttmacher Institute says are going to either restrict abortion or very much ban abortion here. So what we see here is a political movement that is celebrating on the conservative side a big win, but on the Democratic side, you see now this coalescing of people who really, this might not have been their #1 agenda, who are now focusing on this issue and are going to be making the case that conservatives have gone just too far here. I also want to note, when we talk about sort of who is impacted here, I can't state enough that Shannon Brewer, sitting in Mississippi, told me that she is most concerned about black women, poor women who simply just do not have the means to get an abortion. And she told me that she doesn't have any hope at all that Congress will be able to do anything legislatively to change this, to fix this, to have abortion access in this country again. She believes that there will not be abortion access in the way that we had before this decision in her lifetime, Lester. So she really believes at this point that the only way for abortion access to happen is for women to get in cars and help other women, and men in some cases to help women access this. But that is, of course, part of this political decision. It's that there aren't really that many political options here. Democrats are going to be trying to argue that they need to get more power to try to do something about Roe, but this 6-3 majority on the court, they have the final say on so many things, including abortion access in this country. So the politics of this are really uneven. It's unclear what the White House plan is. We've had lawmakers pushing the White House to come out with a plan, some sort of executive action that could try to protect abortion rights, but the White House simply does not exactly know how to deal with this and cannot by themselves, with the stroke of a pen, give women back these rights that now have been taken away.
Okay, Yamiche, I'll ask you and Chuck to stand by. I want to continue this conversation, but let me go back to Maura Barrett. She's with that crowd you've been watching on the right side of the screen, the folks who have gathered outside the Supreme Court. A lot of passion and emotion there. Maura, tell us what's being said and then characterize it for us.
Lester, when we spoke earlier, I was on the side where I had watched people jumping up and down in celebration of the decision, people that were against the right to an abortion. Now I moved over to the other side where we're similarly seeing tears, but instead of those tears of joy, we're seeing tears of anguish. I want you to meet Sky. She's 19 years old and came in from Virginia today. And when we met earlier, she told me that she feels like her country doesn't love her. Can you tell me more about what you're feeling right now and if you have hope about lawmakers taking action going forward after today?
I feel betrayed and I feel lost. I feel like I'm 19 years old. I've had my first year of college. I should be feeling excited and happy, and especially at this time with so much life ahead of me, I shouldn't be worried about my rights being taken away from me. And it hurts that I have little hope for the future. And right now I feel like I'm just clinging to that. Hopefully, in the future, we can have some progress and not just be moving backwards. I feel like especially right now, we're just moving backwards, and we need to be moving forwards instead.
Thank you so much. And so that is a lot of the same message we've heard from people here talking about that feeling of moving backwards. You might not be able to see, but just behind me, there's another group of women who are standing with tape over their mouth that reads second-class citizen. And so that is what the sentiment that we're seeing here from women and men who are very, very upset about the decision here today, Lester.
All right, Maura, thank you very much. Let me go back to Chuck Todd. Chuck, if you're still with us. You know, the question of whether Roe v. Wade was settled law was asked certainly in confirmation hearings for Supreme Court Justice nominees. We have been through the controversy over Ginny Thomas, the wife of Justice Thomas, and apparent efforts to support overturning the election. What does all this collectively do to how we perceive the Supreme Court?
Oh, I think the Supreme Court I think there are no more black robes. I think the robes are red and blue. I think that is, we've been watching this happen particularly in an aggressive way over the last 15 years. It's been a concern on the lower courts. You've started to see, we lowered the threshold to just 50 votes in the Senate, which guaranteed you wouldn't get center left or center right. It means you were going to get something a little more hardcore. It's been an aggressive, obviously, political movement on the right, in particular on judges. And if you look at these back-to-back rulings on guns and on abortion, I think it really does I think what's striking about Roe is it's the first time in my lifetime that I can think of where a Supreme Court took away a right. Supreme Court's, I can't think of another court in the last 100 years that has done this. A right that was there taken away. We're used to the Supreme Court granting rights, same-sex marriage, in reinterpreting things. This is a specific right being taken away from slightly more than half the population. So I just think it's going. We don't fully know the consequences yet. That's why we love the phrase unintended consequences, and I think there's going to be a lot of them, short-term, medium-term, and long-term. But the trust in the court and the erosion of that and making it be viewed as an extraordinarily partisan institution, we already have that in the House and the Senate. And I think now, particularly what happened this week, particularly how Donald Trump appointed the Supreme Court, how he went about it, particularly and the whole Scalia thing with McConnell and all that, there really is a lot of people who believe this is a rigged court. This court's makeup isn't, quote, fair and square. It isn't really representative of where the country is and even was. And I think that is only going to add to cynicism. It's only going to add to that. And it is really, look, John Roberts has been concerned about this. He clearly attempted to try to find a middle ground here, and he failed. He was trying to redefine Roe rather than have it overturned, because I think he realized that it could roil the country, and it could really undermine the court. One other point I want to put out here, and I'll just let it sort of sit out there like a meatball, Lester. I don't think we can fully ever appreciate the 2016 presidential election is going to turn out to be perhaps the most consequential election in more than 100 years. The fallout from that election, right? Particularly, you look at court decision. We can go through a whole thing, and I'm going to do a lot of that on Sunday. But just think about how what has changed in America, in culture, and society due to the results of the 2016 election.
I think many would not disagree with that assessment. It will be interesting to hear what more you have to say about it this weekend on Meet the Press. Chuck, thanks. Let me go back to Pete Williams. Pete, we're kind of left with a checkerboard now of states and how they regard abortion rights. And then there's the issue of even within some of those that plan to ban it, rape and incest. Where does that leave us right now?
Well, it leaves without any constitutional protection for that. Remember, the Mississippi law did not have exceptions for rape or incest, and that is the law that the Supreme Court today has upheld. The majority opinion doesn't say anything about that directly. The dissents say that because of the decision, there's no longer any constitutional support for the idea that there has to be some exception to abortion laws for rape or incest. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in a footnote in his concurrence, says that he thinks the court leaves open an additional question about whether there has to be an exception for cases when an abortion would save the life of the mother. But in terms of rape or incest, there's no longer any constitutional protection or requirement that any of the states that are going to ban abortion make an exception in those cases, and the dissent decries that. And let me just quote one other sentence from the joint dissent written by Stephen Breyer. He says, he concludes his dissent by saying this: "With sorrow for this court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection, we dissent." You know, this is one of those days, Lester, that if we were still in the days where the Supreme Court was open to the public, it's been closed since the pandemic hit, you would see the majority opinion announced by Justice Alito, and it tracks so closely with the draft that was leaked in May. The majority calls the Roe v. Wade decision not only wrong, but egregiously wrong, and explains why it overturns 50 years of precedent. But you would also have seen a long-spirited dissent read from the bench. We don't get to hear that because the justices don't take to the bench now. These decisions just come out on the web. But that's the sort of dramatic division that these opinions represent here. This is as divided as the Supreme Court can be.
Pete, let me, if I can bring up something I was talking to Chuck a moment ago about the image of the court itself. Clearly, they're not playing for popularity, but you presume they want respect. The leak of the draft opinion, I know it shocked you and a lot of people. The questions over Jenny Thomas and her efforts to overturn the election, all these things have taken perhaps given a collective hit to the court. How do you see the future of the court going forward after this ruling?
Well, I mean, this is a Supreme Court that is newly emboldened. I mean, I think you see here so vividly represented in the decisions that we got this week, but most especially on the abortion decision, is years of sort of pent-up frustration of the conservatives that they couldn't get a majority, and I think that's why they are not taking the go slow approach that the Chief Justice had advocated here. They've been waiting to do this for years, and now they have the votes to do it, and they're not going to be held back. So I think, what does that mean for the next term? That probably means that the affirmative action in college admissions is dead. These conservatives have been opposed to that for years. They've been chipping away at it. There are 2 cases coming before the court next year from Harvard and the University of North Carolina. It seems pretty likely that affirmative action will bite the dust next term. So it's the conservatives now have the votes, and they're going full throttle.
Pete Williams, we'll continue to chat along the way here. I want to go to, actually, let me first let you know that we understand that Speaker Nancy Pelosi is going to be coming before the cameras to react here very shortly, so we are standing by for that. But let me go to NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander. Is there official early reaction coming from the White House, Peter?
Yeah, Lester, we haven't heard from the White House just yet, not from the president, but based on the conversations I've been having privately over the course of the last several weeks, and what I'm seeing as I look down at the West Wing, where White House staff right now are removing chairs from the Roosevelt Room, it appears highly likely that we will hear from President Biden on this issue at some point today. The White House, the president, they have been bracing for this ruling for the course of the last several weeks. Top officials, the president among them, have been meeting with lawmakers and stakeholders, abortion right advocates, among others. And while we've yet to hear from President Biden, we have now just heard from his Democratic predecessor in the White House, Barack Obama, who released a statement that says today the Supreme Court not only reversed nearly 50 years of precedent, it relegated the most intensely personal decision someone can make to the whims of politicians and ideologues, attacking the essential freedoms of millions of Americans. Chuck Schumer, in a statement, just called this one of the darkest days that our country has ever seen. And while we're waiting to hear from the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in a matter of moments, she did post a statement moments ago, and she puts the blame directly on Republicans. She says, because of Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, the Republican Party, and their supermajority on the Supreme Court, American women today have less freedom than their mothers. President Biden, what can he do? There has been a lot of pressure, growing calls, particularly from abortion rights advocates, for him to take executive actions to try to do whatever he can to help protect and expand women's reproductive rights. Specifically, the calls have been asking him for the ability to use federal lands to expand reproductive health care for women where possible, and separately to try to increase access to abortion medication, abortion pills. Right now, a majority of abortions in this country are done with the use of abortion medication, those pills. So I think that's going to be where you're going to see a lot of the focus. It's unclear whether President Biden today will announce any new steps he's willing to take, how he's prepared to react to this. The White House did not react preemptively to this ruling, even after that leak came out a matter of months ago. But again, as we stand here at the White House on what Democrats are calling one of the darkest days in this country's history, it does appear increasingly clear that we will hear from the president at some point over the course of this day, Lester.
All right, keep us posted. Peter, thank you for that. Blaine Alexander is in Jackson, Mississippi, where the state's only abortion clinic is located. The very same clinic that went to court to challenge the Mississippi abortion ban at the heart of today's decision. And Blaine, it's not lost on us. We're looking at these protests right now. We're hearing from, leadership in Washington. But what this will impact is the people in that community and communities like it across the country. Tell us what the reaction is there.
You know, Lester, this is truly a polarizing case, no matter where you look, but perhaps no more so than right here in Mississippi. As you said, this is the case that launched this to the Supreme Court. And as I've spent time talking to people on both sides of the issue here in Mississippi, for people who have spent years kind of in the anti-abortion space, who have been fighting for years to essentially take down Roe, there's almost this sense of pride that Mississippi was the case to, in one woman's words, essentially bring down Roe. There's a sense that it originated here in Mississippi, that their state was the one that played such a key role in this. I've been talking with some people, some who have spent almost 30 years essentially advocating for the end of abortion, and their reactions are very striking. Tears, lots of tears. That's what one person texted me, calling it surreal. Another person saying they're just simply thankful, and others saying that this is just the beginning. Now, I want to underscore the point. We talk about kind of the opinion across the country. Many people across the country, the majority, in fact, of Americans believe in a right to abortion, access to abortion. That's not the case here in Mississippi. In fact, recent polling shows that some 59% of people here in the state of Mississippi believe that abortion should be illegal in most cases. So what we're seeing here, while people have told me they're not going to be out in the streets celebrating, they're not going to be out necessarily holding grand press conferences or celebrating publicly, they say that this is just the beginning. What their focus now is to kind of go out and give access and resources to women who now are going to have a different path forward. Lester.
Okay, Blaine, thank you for that. Joining me on the telephone now is U.S. Senator from Minnesota, Democrat Amy Klobuchar. Senator, thank you for being here. I know this ruling deeply disappoints you, but the logical next question is, what are you being Congress, going to do about it?
Well, I think that's a good question to ask our Republican colleagues who put these judges on the bench, who are working against the interests of the American people. We have 80% of the people with us on this that want Roe v. Wade upheld, and we also have women who are going to be affected all over the country. Over 20 states already have laws in place that could be used to restrict access to an abortion, including 13 states, which will automatically go into effect. Literally, they have said in this decision that a woman shouldn't be making her own decisions, but that instead politicians should be making them. So what's next, Lester? Well, the big thing that's next is the election. And women and the men that support them are going to be going in droves to the ballot box, because this Supreme Court isn't just taking us back to the 1950s, it's taking us back to the 1850s.
Do you think this has animated Democrats to the point this could be a decision maker, a turning point in some of these races we're following?
You know what? I'm not going to make a political analysis today, because this is literally fundamentally about a law that has protected women for 50 years. But I think the answer is pretty obvious, that the public is with us, that the Republicans have put these justices on the Supreme Court that are so out of touch with Americans that they literally have issued an opinion in which they note that abortion, the word abortion, is not in the Constitution. You know what else isn't in the Constitution? Lester, woman isn't in the Constitution. The word she is not in the Constitution. There are many things. Air Force wasn't in the Constitution. That is the basis of their opinion, and they have literally turned back the clock on 50 years of well-settled precedent.
Is there anything that Democrats can do, in your opinion, to change this tide?
There's a big thing we can do, and that is reaching out to independents, to moderate Republicans in states across the country and say enough is enough. Join us so that we can get enough people in the U.S. Senate, for starters, and in the House that can basically codify Roe v. Wade into law, that we can make very clear that this protection will remain.
And none of us can say we didn't see this coming. In May, of course, there was that much talked about leak of the draft opinion that is essentially mirrored here in what we saw in this final ruling today. That was, many would argue, that was, if there was no other warning shot, that was it. Did some of these mechanisms begin then, or are you starting from scratch now?
I think that a lot of people became educated on what this means. For so long, young women assumed that this is the world. They never thought that there could be a world where their mothers and their grandmas had more rights than they did. And I think it's already, as you can see from, people are ready. Many of them had read that opinion. They've read reports on the opinion. They knew exactly what's coming their way.
Senator, I hate to interrupt, but Speaker Pelosi is speaking now. We want to hear what she has to say.
This morning, the radical Supreme Court is eviscerating Americans' rights and endangering their health and safety. But the Congress will continue to act to overcome this extremism and protect the American people. Today, the Republican-controlled Supreme Court has achieved their dark, extreme goal of ripping away a woman's right to make their own reproductive health decisions. Because of Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, and the Republican Party, their supermajority in the Supreme Court, American women today have less freedom than their mothers. With Roe and their attempt to destroy it, radical Republicans are charging ahead with their crusade to criminalize health freedom. In the Congress, be aware of this, the Republicans are plotting a nationwide abortion ban. They cannot be allowed to have a majority in the Congress to do that, but that's their goal. And if you read, and again, we're all studying all this, but if you read what is in the very clear, one of the justices had his own statement. It's about contraception, in vitro fertilization, family planning. That is all what will spring from their decision that they made today. It's such a contradiction. Yesterday, they say the states cannot make laws governing the constitutional right to bear arms. And today, they're saying the exact reverse, that the states can overturn a constitutional right. For 50 years, a constitutional right for a woman having the right to choose. The hypocrisy is raging, but the harm is endless. What this means to women is such an insult. It's a slap in the face to women about using their own judgment to make their own decisions about their reproductive freedom. And again, it goes well. I always have said the termination of a pregnancy is just their opening act. It's just their front game. But behind it, and for years, I have seen in this Congress opposition to any family planning, domestic or global. when we have had those discussions and those debates and those votes on the floor of the House. This is deadly serious, but we are not going to let this pass. A woman's right to choose reproductive freedom is on the ballot in November. We cannot allow them to take charge so that they can institute their goal, which is to criminalize reproductive freedom, to criminalize it. Right now, they're saying in states that they can arrest doctors and all the rest. What is happening here? What is happening here? A woman's fundamental health decisions are her own to make in consultation with her doctor, her faith, her family, not some right-wing politicians that Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell packed the court with. While Republicans seek to punish and control women, Democrats will keep fighting ferociously to enshrine Roe v. Wade into the law of the land. This cruel ruling is outrageous and heart-wrenching, but make no mistake, again, it's all on the ballot in November. The Supreme Court has ended a constitutional right. This is 50 years proclaimed a constitutional right. What happened today was historic in many respects. Historic in that it had not recognized a constitutional right and then reversed it. This is a first. And again, just before it imposed a constitutional right to allow for concealed weapons. How about those justices coming before the senators and saying that they respected, sorry to say, the precedent of the court, that they respected the right of privacy in the Constitution of the United States? Did you hear that? Were they not telling the truth then? Again, just getting to the gun issue, because really, in preparation for this morning, I was really in an exalted state about what happened in the United States Senate yesterday. Counterpoint to the dangerous decision of this Trumpian Supreme Court that they made yesterday, but a way to take us to, as the bill is called, community safety. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Right now, and I'm going to have to leave momentarily because we just finished voting on the rule, we will be debating the bill on the floor, and we expect a good bipartisan vote on it in the House. We congratulate the Senate on the work that they have done and the timeliness of it to be passed in the Senate in a strong bipartisan way on a day when the court made such a dangerous, dangerous decision. We will, many of our House Democrats' proposals that are included in this package are that keep deadly weapons out of dangerous hands by encouraging states to establish extreme risk protection order laws, ERPO, otherwise known as red flag laws, help put end to straw purchases, close the boyfriend loophole. So many good things are in there, and it's not everything that we want, and we must keep moving toward background checks, but universal background checks, which will save the most lives. But this will save lives. And to listen to Lucy McGrath and other family members of those who have lost their loved ones, this is a giant step forward. Maybe not so much a giant, but a strong step forward. And if it's good enough for them, then we rejoice in passing it. As I say to members all the time with legislation, do not judge it for what isn't in it, but respect it for what is. And there's much to be respected in this legislation. On a happier note, yesterday we celebrated 50 years of Title IX, which has reformed equality and opportunity.
Speaker
in our country.
Pelosi talking to gathered reporters at the Capitol reacting to this Supreme Court decision today. Near the end, you heard her celebrating the expected passage of the gun safety legislation, bipartisan legislation, but she reserved some very strong words for the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, calling it a Trumpian Supreme Court. She said this was, they were essentially had accomplished their dark and extreme goal, and she said women today have less freedom than their mothers, and vowing that this will be an issue in the midterm elections, or hoping it will be an issue in the midterm elections. Joining us now is Kristen Day, Executive Director of Democrats for Life of America. Kristen, thank you for being with us. Can you give us your reaction not only to the decision, but some of what Speaker Pelosi just said?
Oh, we are just thrilled by the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. It's long past due. With respect to what the Speaker says, I know it's a very emotional issue, but she continually overlooks the fact that women support overturning Roe v. Wade. Democrats support overturning Roe v. Wade. Not all Democrats are celebrating this. Not all Democrats advocate for Roe and maintaining abortion. So we have an opportunity here as a party to bring people together on this issue and look to see how we can support women. I hear a lot of talk about shipping women off to other states to get an abortion. How about helping women where they are? How about looking at ways to help women stay in school, ways for women to keep their jobs and have their babies, and providing women with real choice rather than abortion as the only solution, as we have done for decades. The Speaker mentioned criminalization. Is that where you think this is going? And is that something you would support? Absolutely not. I signed a letter with pro-life leaders saying we do not want to criminalize women for seeking abortion. A woman who is in an unplanned pregnancy and in that situation deserves compassion, love, and support, and not criminalization. So I think the pro-life women and men and women that I work with are united on that front. We want to help pregnant women. We want them to have the opportunity to parent. When you look at statistics, it's poor women who are most likely to seek abortion. We need to do better as a nation in providing equity for those women and allowing them the same opportunities to parent as we do of wealthy individuals. Would you like more clarity? What do you think should happen in Congress going forward? I think Congress should stay back for a little bit, let the states work this out. Each state's going to have their own challenge. For example, California, New York, and New Jersey have the highest abortion rates in the nation. What are they going to do to lower those rates and provide women with real choice? States that are limiting abortion to 8 weeks or 15 weeks, what are they going to do to support those women who no longer can seek abortion in those states? How are we going to provide them with the opportunity and the support to parent, feed their families, keep their jobs, and have affordable health care, affordable child care? Kristen, we as a nation are so much better than continuing this 50-year fight over the legality of abortion. Let's put women and children first, and let's provide the support, compassion to help them with a real choice to become parents. Kristen Day, thank you for coming on with us and giving us your views. We appreciate it. Sure, thank you very much. So it is a little bit after 11 o'clock in the East. Let me recap the extraordinary and historical decision that came down just after 10 a.m. Eastern. Roe v. Wade, a woman's right to abortion, has been overturned by the Supreme Court after almost 50 years and will lead to nearly total bans on the procedure in about half the states. The majority conservative Supreme Court overturned Roe in this morning's decision. It's a victory for opponents of abortion. You just heard from one. Supporters of abortion rights were bracing for the loss after an early draft of the opinion was leaked in May and call it an assault on the reproductive freedoms of women. The ruling came in in a dispute over a law passed by Mississippi's Republican-controlled legislature to ban abortions after 15 weeks. Joining us now, NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson, who's been monitoring reaction and also trying to put the puzzle pieces together because the rule of the land is going to be very different in various places. It is an almost instantaneous change now that this decision, the anticipated ruling, has finally come down, Lester. Let me give you a sense of what we're hearing as far as political reaction. You've had a taste of it in our last hour and 10 minutes or so of coverage here on NBC News. But we've heard now from Mike Pence, right? From
former vice president, somebody who is speculated to be a potential 2024 candidate. This is obviously a decision that is going to reshape not just the midterms, but the next presidential election, who says that today life won. Pence goes on to say the Supreme Court has righted an historic wrong and reaffirmed the right of the American people to govern themselves at the state level in a manner consistent with their values and aspirations. He also says the Supreme Court has given the American people a new beginning for life and commends the justices in the majority for having the courage of their convictions. This speaks to an important point, Lester, which is something you and Chuck talked about a couple of minutes ago, the consequences of the 2016 election specifically. I was out on the campaign trail in that campaign talking with and covering all of the Republican candidates essentially, and at every campaign event I went to, just about, when I would talk to voters in the room, and I'm talking not big rallies, but small rooms in, Iowa and South Carolina and beyond, I heard all the time about the Supreme Court. It was a mobilizing factor for Republican voters. 70% of those voters in 2016 said that the Supreme Court was a very important issue for them, compared to just 62% of voters who leaned Democratic that campaign year. You are seeing that now come to fruition. You heard Nancy Pelosi reference it here. The justices, including Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, who during their confirmation hearings said that Roe versus Wade was a precedent of the United States Supreme Court that had been reaffirmed. They all said variations on a theme to that point. That is something that Speaker Pelosi is raising now. She says, were they not telling the truth? That is why she sees this. She is hoping that this will be, for Democrats now, a mobilizing issue in the midterms. When you talk about 2016, Lester, we're also hearing reaction from the candidate then, Hillary Clinton, who says this decision will live in infamy, she says, as a step backward for women's rights and human rights. One of the other pieces of this, as we look at this live shot now outside the Supreme Court, where I imagine the crowd is growing by the minute, is what this means for the role of the Supreme Court in our political discourse and in society at this moment. You have seen the impact just in the last few months, Lester. Recent polling has found that only 44% of Americans see the Supreme Court as a nonpartisan entity, essentially, have trust and faith in the court. That is down 11% from where that number was in March. So you are seeing that through line happen for the court, Lester, and that is going to have political implications down the road.
All right, Hallie, thanks. Joining us now is NBC's chief Washington correspondent, Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, you were there at the beginning of Roe, and then you are there now as this historic decision has come down. I'm really curious your thoughts at this moment.
Well, it's obviously, life-changing in so many ways, profound ways, as Pete was pointing out to you earlier, and then Chuck. Never before has a constitutional right conferred by the court been taken away, and this one after nearly 50 years. And I was recently covering a group called the Janes. It is a group of women who organized pre-Roe in Chicago to break the law and to organize an underground network, if you will, of the so-called Janes, of women with medical background who could provide illegal abortion safely, because there were so many deaths in those years across the country by women trying to self-abort abort themselves, and so many botched procedures and so many maternal deaths. So this obviously is changing the politics. We've been talking about that. You've got states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin where you have governor's races now where Democratic governors are either running for a re-election or a term limited and are opposing Republicans determined to ban abortion. In fact, in Pennsylvania, Mastriano, the candidate there, has said it would be an outright ban, no exceptions. The legislature in Pennsylvania has repeatedly passed such laws, which have been repeatedly vetoed by the Democratic governor, the incumbent, is term limited. So you've got major states, not just in red states, but in blue or purple states, where you're going to see major changes. So it's not just half the country, it's more than half the country, where presumably after these midterms, and certainly after 24, you could have more than half the country. And of course the 13 trigger law states where it will almost immediately become banned, and there'll be states with no exceptions at all. This ruling does preserve the life of the mother when that is in jeopardy, but not rape and incest. Let me just point out, to follow up on something that was just mentioned by Hallie, the confirmation hearings of Justices Kavanaugh and Alito were obviously decisive. Brett Kavanaugh, questioned by Dianne Feinstein in 2018, asked, What would your position today be on women's right to choose? He answered, as a judge, it is an important precedent of the Supreme Court. By it, I mean Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. They have been reaffirmed many times. Casey is precedent on precedent, which itself is an important factor to remember, Kavanaugh said. And more of what Amy Coney Barrett said just in 2020. Again, Dianne Feinstein questioning her. What I will commit is that I will obey all the rules of stare decisis, referring to the doctrine of courts giving weight to precedent. But then went on to say, for any issue that comes up, abortion or anything else, I'll follow the law. Then there's some wiggle room because Amy Klobuchar asked Barrett about Roe v. Wade being a super precedent, and Barrett replied that that term is used in, quote, scholarship in an article that she has defined it. So she left some academic wiggle room there. Gorsuch as well in 2017 said, I would tell you that Roe v. Wade is decided in 1973 is a precedent of the U.S. Supreme Court. It has been reaffirmed. So there is the issue of whether these Trump justices actually misled the Senate of the United States and the public in what they said during confirmations. The country's already divided. We are seeing it now in the hearings that we've been living through for the last few weeks, the fifth one just yesterday. There is such a division in this country politically, red versus blue, Trump versus anti-Trump. But this clearly is making the issue of a woman's right to choose the preeminent issue in the midterms and in the 2024 elections, and further dividing the country in a hugely polarizing way. Lester?
Andrea Mitchell, we greatly appreciate your historical perspective there. Kristen Hawkins is the president of Students for Life of America and joins us now. Kristen, good morning and thank you for joining us. Can you give us your reaction to the ruling and some of what you're hearing today?
Well, this has been a ruling that's 49 years in the making. To see the Supreme Court reverse the egregious wrong of Roe v. Wade and Doe versus Bolton, it's a historic moment. And for all of us in the pro-life generation who could have been aborted for the price of a PlayStation, our mothers told our existence didn't matter. It's a significant moment. It's a moment where we know we have a lot of responsibility as we become the first post-Roe generation, as we ensure that no woman 3,000 pregnancy centers and 400 maternity homes across the nation, which vastly outnumber the number of predatory abortion facilities.
In your view, does your work end now? Is this the ultimate victory, or where do you see this going?
No. Absolutely not. This was phase one in our objective in the pro-life movement to make abortion unthinkable throughout our country. This is why we have more than 1,300 chapters on college and high school campuses across the country. Not only are we talking and engaging with those who are directly targeted by the predatory abortion industry, but we're the ones actually transforming the campus policies to make sure no woman ever again feels like she has to choose between the life of her child and her education.
Kristen,
we actually have a very progressive view. This is 2022.
Yeah, Kristen, in some of these states that they don't recognize rape or incest, would you like more clarity? Where do you stand there?
I would say that my very good friend Ryan, who was conceived out of sexual assault, his life matters. And the circumstance of your conception does not deem you unworthy of life. Because that's actually a very slippery slope. If my father today would go, no, I think there's going to be a lot of conversations in the pro-life movement as we move forward state by state. Today, hopefully 880 babies will be saved tomorrow in 26 states who should move quickly to make abortion a thing of the past and to end this gruesome violence. But we're going to have a lot of strategy discussions in the coming weeks and months, as you know, because reversing Roe versus Wade doesn't end our fight. We will now go state by state. And with a trained army of 150,000 young people, the post-Roe generation's ready to do that.
All right, Kristen, thank you for taking time and being with us and expressing your views. I want to go right to NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, we've had a little over an hour now to digest this. You've had a chance to go through the entire ruling. What stands out? What should people know?
Well, first of all, I think we have to say again, this is 5-4 on overturning Roe, 6-3 on upholding the Mississippi law that bans abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Secondly, it's Chief Justice Roberts who doesn't join the majority. He says that's going too far too fast. The majority opinion does say, and we've noted this before, that Justice Alito, who wrote it, said nothing in this opinion should be read to cast doubt on any of the court's other precedents that found constitutional rights that were not explicitly mentioned, such as the right to interracial marriage, the right to contraception, the right to same-sex marriage. He says abortion is different because it involves a potential life. And only Justice Clarence Thomas, of all of the 9 so far, said, well, the court should actually go back and look at those precedents too. Secondly, of course, as we've noted before, half the states will now probably ban abortion, roughly half, and 13 of them have laws already on the books, so-called trigger laws. And Missouri now says it's the first state to have its trigger law spring into effect. Its Attorney General Eric Schmidt has already issued a letter. Many of these state laws, trigger laws, said that the triggering event would be the Supreme Court's decision, followed by some kind of analysis by the state's Attorney General that that's what the Supreme Court has done. He's already got a letter out saying it's now illegal in Missouri. So Missouri appears to be the first state. There's a couple of others that will follow very quickly. In the other trigger states, it's a matter of 10 days or 30 days. So it's not going to be, abortion is now not immediately illegal in all of those states in which it was likely to become illegal, but it will be probably within a month to take full effect, Lester, in terms of all those other states.
Yeah, let me go back to what you said, though, about this notion that this wouldn't be used as a precedent to undo other constitutional rights. It's said in the ruling, but is it binding?
Well, no, not at all. I mean, that's, I think, what concerns, for example, advocates of same-sex marriage, because the logic of the Supreme Court's decision in this majority opinion is precisely what we read about in the leaked opinion that was written in February. This opinion here, this majority opinion, is largely unchanged. I mean, there's some references to the dissent and some other things, but the logic of it is still what was laid out in February. What Justice Alito and the majority says today is that there is no explicit mention of a right to abortion in the Constitution. So the question is, was it somehow granted by the 14th Amendment? And he says the test for that is it has to be deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions and part of a concept of ordered liberty. And he says it flunks that test. Well, of course, same-sex marriage would flunk that test too. There was no protection for contraception at the founding. So by the court's logic here, those precedents could be in danger. Several of the justices go out of their way to say, no, it won't make any difference. Justice Kavanaugh says in his concurrence today, overruling Roe does not mean the overruling of those precedents and does not, he emphasizes the word not, threaten or cast doubt on those precedents. So I think, take them at their word, but there is certainly, you could argue, the seeds of destruction for those in this opinion.
All right, Pete, thank you. And on that right side of your screen, you continue to view the protests, the celebrations. How you describe them really depends on where people are. But clearly, a lot of emotion has spilled out on the steps of the Supreme Court after this historic ruling, the court overturning Roe v. Wade. Dr. Cheryl Hamlin is with the Jackson, Mississippi Women's Health Organization. Doctor, can you tell us what this means for you and your organization?
Well, I guess, as soon as the Attorney General signs it, we have a few days before the clinic is closed. And so, for the women of Mississippi and the other 13 states that have trigger laws, they will no longer have access to abortion in any form. And so for them, it means that, I'm sure that if, women are having miscarriages, especially, poor and women of color, they'll, be placed under scrutiny? Did they do this to themselves? I'm sure that women who do make it out of state to get a procedure, when they return, will be afraid to seek medical care. Some people will self-abort. Some people will continue dangerous pregnancies. So, I mean, it's obviously devastating for these women.
Well, doctor, tell me, what are the options for a woman in your community who has decided she wants an abortion? What do the options become in terms of how far travel may be?
Yeah, so Illinois is probably the closest state. I mean, I think it's probably a 7-hour drive or something to the closest clinic. New Mexico is about a 10-hour drive. Massachusetts, you know, is a 22-hour drive. There's always the option of getting pills through the mail, and you know, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be seeking out how to do that. You know, I'm also sure the state will make that illegal, but maybe hard to enforce. So, you know, those will be the options, basically.
Are you hearing from patients even today, even since this ruling?
Yeah, in the past hour, no, I haven't heard from anybody, but I'm, you know, obviously people that already have appointments are going to be calling and figuring out what they need to do.
Okay. Dr. Hamlin, thank you for taking a moment to speak to us. We appreciate it. NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander joins us now. Peter, are we going to hear from the president?
Yeah, Lester, we have now just learned that President Biden will address this abortion ruling from the Supreme Court at 12:30 Eastern Time. That's roughly an hour and 10 minutes from now. He'll be speaking inside what's called the Cross Hall. That's within the White House residence, where he has delivered remarks on other historically significant days. The White House, I can tell you, I think was caught off guard by this ruling coming today. Not that the decision would come. They had expected it based on, frankly, that draft that came out about 6 to 8 weeks ago. But as I spoke to an aide a little bit earlier, I told them that the ruling had been made on abortion. They were leaving the campus and quickly turned around to gather in preparation for the president's reaction to this. But they have been bracing for this moment to take place in some form for a matter of weeks, meeting with those abortion rights advocates, meeting with lawmakers and others. And there's obviously been growing pressure on this White House to react, not just preemptively. There was a hope that the White House might make some announcements in advance, but certainly as soon as this ruling came in, the pressure certainly from abortion rights advocates is that the president would do what he can within his power in terms of executive action, specifically perhaps expanding access to reproductive health care on federal lands, and separately to increase access to medication, abortion medication, specifically pills right now, which account for more than half of the abortions in this country at the time. As you try to get a better understanding of where the country is on this issue, NBC News recently completed a poll on it, and just to be specific, 60% of Americans said in that recent poll that Americans believe that abortion should be either always legal or legal most of the time, compared to 37% who said abortion should be illegal, either with exceptions or without exceptions. So that gives you a sense broadly of where the country is on this issue. Among the biggest concerns that the White House has been communicating is how this is going to impact those poor, minority women, low-income women across this country whose access, particularly in the South and the Midwest, they have said, was already limited even before this ruling on Roe v. Wade. The struggle to get abortion care was limited due to a variety of things, including insurance coverage in some places that was impacted by what's called a Hyde Amendment. Doesn't allow federal money to be spent on abortions, and also due to waiting periods that exist as well. We have heard from the White House in the course of the last several weeks. They have been very upset and frustrated by this expected ruling, by the decisions taking place earlier in Mississippi, referring to them as unconstitutional attacks on women's reproductive rights. Lester?
All right, Peter Alexander, the White House, where we will be hearing from the president about 12:30 Eastern Time, a little over an hour from now, if it remains on schedule. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Carol Lamb. She's a former U.S. attorney and federal prosecutor. Carol, thank you for being here. First, just the nuts and bolts here. So I want to get the terminology right. Abortion is not illegal, but it is no longer a constitutional right. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, Lester. This is not a ban, a total ban on abortion that's been decided by the Supreme Court. What this does is it changes the approach to abortion. It says that women no longer have a fundamental constitutional right to make the decision regarding terminating their pregnancy at any stage of the pregnancy. That is no longer a protected right under the U.S. Constitution. And what that does is it throws the decision back to each individual state. So each state legislature, under its own state constitution, makes the decision whether a woman has access to an abortion and all the parameters around that decision, at what stage of the abortion, or whether there's a ban on abortions in that state entirely. That is now an issue for each state legislature.
Stepping away from whatever side you may fall on, the fact that the Supreme Court has now taken away a right that it had originally granted, can you talk to the significance of that legally?
You know, Lester, this has to be a co-equal headline, in addition to the fact that this decision impacts so many people in the country all at once. The co-equal headline really has to be, what does this mean for past cases in other areas where the court has relied on a personal privacy and personal liberty right of an individual? Pete Wilson talked about this earlier: birth control, contraception, gay marriage, sodomy laws. There are a lot of laws that have been struck down in the past 50 years because the court has found a right to privacy and personal liberty in the Constitution. What happened here today is that one school of thought about how you interpret the Constitution has prevailed over a different thought. In the past 50 years, justices on the Supreme Court have said that there is an implicit right to privacy in the Constitution. It is not enumerated the way the Second Amendment protects gun rights in the Constitution. And what the court said today is no, abortion rights are not explicitly called out in the Constitution. And when that happens, you have to look to history and tradition in the nation to figure out whether there is such a right. And they found that there was no such right in the history and tradition of the nation, but that could be said as well for homosexual marriage and gay rights in general, and most specifically, contraception or birth control. There are some states now that have proposed bans on IUDs because of the way IUDs work. People think of them as contraception, but in some cases they can interfere with the embedding of a fertilized egg in the woman, and they say that is a form of abortion. So you can see the cracks already beginning to occur in what we thought were fundamental rights.
I just want to go back and look at Justice Alito's thinking, this idea that, well, those other rights don't involve a life. Does the logic follow there, or when you start taking that piece by piece, does it become a harder argument he makes? And by the way, is that door still open, no matter what he may say about that? Is that door still open to go back and revisit these other rights?
Exactly what you said right now, Lester. That door is still open because Justice Alito said this both in the leaked draft that was leaked in May and this opinion. He said, oh, this applies only to abortion. It doesn't apply to those other decisions. That is what is known as dicta. That in legal circles, that's known as dicta, which means that is saying something that is not essential to the holding of this case. And when it is not essential to the holding of the case, it has no binding precedential value. So Justice Alito might be trying to make this go down a little bit easier, but the logic of his opinion, as Justice Thomas has pointed out, is that these cases are now vulnerable, these other rights.
Does this ever go back before the court? Is there a case that could reopen the door on this ultimate decision?
It would require what happened in this case. It would require a case being teed up, and a case is not going to be teed up for revisiting this decision until the side that tees it up thinks that it has the votes to make a revisiting happen, and that is likely not to happen for a long time.
All right, Carol Lamb, thanks for walking us through some of that. We appreciate it. I want to bring back NBC Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, we've heard some reaction, including from Speaker Pelosi. We've heard those on the right obviously celebrating what for them is a long, hard battle and final victory here. Over the last hour and a half, tell me how this is, some of the themes that you're seeing strike up.
Well, this really, of course, as you noted, is the culmination of a conservative goal to overturn Roe v. Wade in this country, undoing precedent of nearly 50 years. And what we've been hearing from the conservative movement is that this is a really big win for them. We heard from Vice President Mike Pence, who said this is righting a wrong. I was also looking for reaction from former President Trump, and while he has not put out a message just yet, at least from what I just checked, what he has done is put out already a message from yesterday when the Supreme Court ruled on guns. And he said there, and I want to read it because I think it's incredibly important. He said, "Elections have consequences. I promise to appoint justices and judges that would stand up for the Constitution." And today, the Supreme Court upheld, in that case, the Second Amendment right of all Americans. But you can imagine that same language about elections having consequences and about the fact that the justices are standing by the Constitution can also be applied to today. So we can expect former President Trump to also take a victory lap here because, of course, this is because he was able to put on conservative Supreme Court justices that now Roe v. Wade has been overturned. I've also been listening to Democrats, of course, Nancy Pelosi in particular, who talked about the fact that this really is not going to stand, talking about the fact that reproductive freedom will be on the ballot in November. That says something about where Democrats want to message this and the idea that they're going to be making the case in the states, in elections, that people should vote for Democrats to try to get some sort of rectification from there, some sort of change, rather, when it comes to access to abortions. But I should tell you, in talking to Democrats, they're sort of scrambling. The political will is there to do something, but the actual plan to do something is not clear. I also heard from a number of people calling this egregious, saying that black women in particular, women of color, poor women, that they're going to have to really figure out how to mobilize them to vote in November, but also, of course, at the same time as they're mobilizing them to the ballot box, they're going to have to mobilize them to different clinics because they're going to have to be balancing what now is going to be such restricted access to abortion. So there's a lot here on the political side here to talk about. One last thing, and when it comes to sort of the politics of this in the midterms, it's been Democrats that have not really been able to culminate and really focus their energy on abortion in the way that Republicans have. This has been a talking point for Republicans over and over again. So many people that I interviewed when I was talking to them about former President Trump and his brash nature, people would tell me that they didn't like it, that they didn't like the way that he tweeted, or they didn't like the way that he talked, or the revolving door of people leaving the White House in and out, but that they were with him because they believe that abortion could be overturned. So that was the conservative messaging. That's a well-oiled machine that they've really been working on. But for Democrats, they're now going to have to build a machine to explain to people and to make the case to people in the middle of inflation, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of gun rights and all sorts of debates, that abortion should be the thing that's up on their minds, that is the most important thing, the priority for them. And we know that, of course, there are a lot of women in this country who will now be using their voices and their stories to be making the political case that this decision should be tried to be overturned in some way through politics. But it's a very, very hard, complicated, and rough road ahead for Democrats who are going to be trying to change what the consequences of this decision will mean for women across this country.
Yamiche, thank you. Joining us in the conversation, NBC senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson with more on what the decision could mean. And Hallie, we're hearing from Speaker Pelosi and others on the left. We're going to fight this. We're going to make this part of the midterms. But bottom line is Democrats are demoralized today.
If you're a Democrat, you're going, where do we go next, right? You're trying to figure that out, but there is not an easy or clear answer given the makeup of the Supreme Court as it sits now. You've got, take the other two branches, right? On the executive branch side, we're going to hear from President Biden in just about an hour from now. He has been under pressure from Democrats to try to do something unilaterally were this to be the case. We'll see what he says there. On the legislative branch, you have action from Congress. We are going to, Lester, we're learning we're going to see some of the first action next month in a matter of weeks when the Senate is back back from its recess, with the Judiciary Committee set to hold a hearing. We're just learning this in from the chairman to explore what they call the grim reality of a post-Roe America. Of course, the Senate Judiciary Committee led by a Democratic chairman. So that will be, I think, some of the first glimpses we will get from a really practical, concrete level as to what Democrats could do, particularly on the Senate side, in order to take some kind of action to shore up the protections of Roe that Speaker Pelosi has talked about. Let me put some numbers behind the conversation that we're having, Lester, some data here, right? According to our NBC News polling, when you talk about the number of Americans who believe that abortion is the most important issue facing this country, it was practically non-existent if you were to ask, let's say, 6 months ago. Only 3% of Americans said it was the most important issue. That jumped just last month to 10% now, right? After the leaked ruling, the leaked decision, I should say, came out in early May, you saw that number rise. That is a number that I think Democrats are looking at to say, okay, now we have the decision. It is no longer theoretical. It is real. It is practical. And we will, in a matter of, 10 to 30 days to 3 months, see the real implications of that in states across the country. I think there is a bet being made that that number will go up. More people will feel mobilized by it. You also have, when you look at the Supreme Court in this decision, the question that comes up, is the court out of step with what the majority of Americans want? 63% of Americans thought Roe versus Wade should not be overturned, compared to only about 30% who thought it should be, right? So that gives you a sense, I think, across the country of where people are. That said, for Republicans, of course, those numbers are inverted. Only about a third of Republicans believe that abortion should be legal in all or most instances. So that is the landscape that we're in at this moment in time. What we should be looking for, right, in addition to next month, what Congress is going to do, what specific actions they will take. Because right now, and you heard it a little bit, Lester, in your interview with Senator Amy Klobuchar, the sense that this is, I think she said something like, this isn't the time for politics, this is the time to sort of grieve the loss of this right for women. I hear her saying that, but also there is undeniably a political angle to this moving forward for abortion rights advocates who see this fight as not being over. Anti-abortion activists also see the fight as not being over because they want to go even further. And they have said this to you, they've said this to me and to others, that they see the fight now as trying to shore up anti-abortion support in more states and in more ways, including on the federal picture, too. So that is where we're seeing this kind of coalesce, Lester.
And then, Hallie, if you recall, there were a lot of conversations about expanding the court. What happens to that conversation?
It's a great question, Lester. There was not much appetite for that at all. That came up a lot in the 2020 campaign, especially in the Democratic primary. Should we do this? Should Democrats do this was the question that they were asking. And in this instance, you didn't see any appetite from the White House on that. There was a report that came out. That is a politically tough discussion to have because of specifically some more moderate Democratic senators, for example, who would resist that and who have said that they would not be open to changing that framework. You asked, does this change the game? I'm looking at a response from Senator Joe Manchin, for example, who has been, as you well know, one of the thorns in the side, if you will, for his fellow Democratic colleagues who have been wanting him in many ways to take action on things that the rest of the party wanted. Senator Manchin, along with Senator Kyrsten Sinema, for example, just for the political landscape, has been one of the people who has resisted some of the moves, for example, changing Senate rules to allow Democrats to get things done unilaterally with just 50 votes instead of 60, which is the threshold now. He says he is deeply disappointed that the court has voted to overturn Roe. He talks about how he was raised pro-life as a Catholic, and he says, and I'm quoting him, "I will always consider myself pro-life," but he says he would support legislation that would codify the rights that Roe previously protected, right? A vote of support for some action on the federal level to codify those rights. The question is it enough? We just don't know at this point.
Okay, Hallie, thank you. Joining us now is NBC News contributor and editor and CEO of the Dispatch, Stephen Hayes. Stephen, we appreciate you joining us. You've heard a lot of this conversation about the political implications. I'm curious to hear your views.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think if you asked pro-lifers before this decision came down what results they would like to come out of this decision, one of them would be the kinds of things that you heard from Yamiche and Hallie, a political discussion, a political debate that has basically been foreclosed in many respects because the court did what it did in 1973 with Roe versus Wade. Conservatives, Republicans, pro-lifers have made the argument that this is a decision, that this is a debate best had in a political context. Now make these decisions, have these debates. It'll be very interesting to learn whether the uptick that we've seen in the number of people responding to pollsters saying that abortion is the most important issue or one of the most important issues, if that continues. You've seen sort of a sea change in the way that we look at abortion culturally in the country over the past 50 years, even as the laws have remained the same. It'll be very interesting to see if that cultural change turns into a political change.
And what the immediate pressure on Democrats to do something, and there will be that call to do something. What in the short term, what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as Hallie was pointing out, you're already seeing statements from Democrats, from Nancy Pelosi, from others, looking to take steps that they can take politically, either in federal legislation, in state houses around the country, to try to codify some of the rules that were in place with Roe v. Wade. Certainly, I think Democrats are going to make this a political issue. Democrats want to run on this. They would certainly, for political, I think practical political reasons, like to use it to avoid conversations about things like the economy, about inflation, about some of the other things that have President Biden's approval ratings is sort of cratering at this point. But I think that we'll see a very quick move from Democrats to try to introduce these kinds of additional codifications of Roe at both the federal level and in states around the country.
All right, Stephen, thank you. We've been watching that crowd on the steps of the Supreme Court. And as I said, it's a microcosm of this country right now. There are people who are gleeful. They are celebrating the decision. There are people who are upset, angry, and somewhat bewildered by all this. Let's bring in NBC's Maura Barrett, who's with the crowds who have gathered outside the Supreme Court. And I know you're hearing it from both sides, Maura.
Lester, the way that you just contextualize it is completely accurate. It's a very mixed bag here on the ground, and the crowd has just quadrupled, if not more, since the decision came down just after 10 a.m. I'm still right in the middle of it, just outside in front of the Supreme Court. And what I have noticed, while we've seen a mix of opinions, it is a plurality of young people. And I want to bring in Nina. She traveled in from Pennsylvania, and she was one of the people that was celebrating the decision being overturned. And so, Nina, I want to ask you, what drove you to come out here today? What are you looking for? And tell me a little bit about how you're feeling now that we saw the decision come down.
Well, as you can see, I'm very excited. I drove down here for Students for Life. We have a bunch of collectives and leadership programs focused on making sure women have the necessary resources that they need throughout their pregnancy. And I'm excited, but we all, as if you can see the celebration, but we all know this is not where the work ends. This is where it begins, because from anyone you can ask, this is what we'll be working for the rest of our lives, to make abortion illegal, unthinkable, and unnecessary.
And our NBC polling has shown that 60% of women think, or 60% of Americans think that abortion should be legal in some capacity. 30% are on the other side of it. What do you make that your group is kind of in the minority on this, and what do you want to say to other people who don't share the same opinions as you?
I mean, there's a lot to, obviously, there's a lot of nuances, a lot of different opinions, but at the end of the day, human rights begin at conception, they end at natural death, and that's what we're fighting for. So no matter what you believe, we're here to protect the woman and the child.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And so, Lester, like we just talked about, there is a big variety of opinions on the ground right now, but we do hear a lot of celebration and music playing here today, and people that weren't necessarily expecting this to come down today. Most people that I've talked to were thinking that it was going to be early next week that this decision would come, and so it is interesting to see as the crowd continues to grow now that the decision has come through, and we'll continue to talk to people on the ground, especially as we know that the president had previously said prior to the decision coming down that he was hoping that Congress would take action to restore Roe. We have heard rumblings about House Democrats coming down, and we'll keep an eye out for lawmakers that are here as well. Lester.
Okay, Maura, thank you for the update there from the steps of the Supreme Court reaction to today's ruling. I'm joined now by Michigan's Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Governor, thank you for being with us. You're a state that's had an anti-abortion law in place since the 30s, but essentially lived under the world of Roe v. Wade. What is your reaction?
Well, it's devastating. I know it's not surprising, but it is devastating. And this is not the end of the story. We've got a lot of work to do. We're fighting like hell here in Michigan to protect Michigan women's access to abortion and reproductive health care. But this is a really stark moment in America and a huge setback for every generation younger than me, who now will have fewer rights than my generation has had our whole lives.
You've got a Republican legislature there. Can you give us an idea of the battles to come?
This is going to be tricky. Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they've already, they're at work already. So reverting to this 1931 law is part of the story. It would be, Michigan would go from being a pro-choice state to it being a felony, no exceptions for rape or incest. Every Republican running for governor has endorsed that law. And my current legislature has already introduced bills to criminalize doctors and nurses and put them in jail for 10 years. I mean, this is how high the stakes are right here in this important battleground state. And I'm going to continue to fight and veto every effort to make it harder for women. But this is a very scary moment.
We've been talking throughout the morning that we all saw this coming, certainly that leak draft opinion and this hewed alongside it. What have you done in Michigan in anticipation of this ruling?
Yeah, so I filed a lawsuit a few months ago, and a lot of people said, oh, it's too early, or it's not ripe, or it's, maybe this won't happen. I'm glad that I did. I am waiting for our Supreme Court to take action. We are anticipating that we'll be having a briefing soon, but time is of the essence. We won an injunction. One of our allies won an injunction, so the 1931 law is not in effect at this moment. Women still have the same rights we had yesterday, but it is precarious. It is on appeal, and that's why I'm hoping the Supreme Court will take my lawsuit up ASAP.
Do you think this changes the equation of the midterms as we march toward November?
You know what? I know that 70% of people in Michigan support a woman having the right to make her own decision, regardless of how they feel individually, supporting that right for women. And so I do think that this is something that will bring a lot of people out, and a lot of people will be very upset and angry about the state of jurisprudence in our nation and rollback of women's rights. So I anticipate that a lot of people will be activated by this.
Governor Whitmer, good to see you. Thank you for taking the time for us.
Thank you.
Joining us now is NBC News political director and Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd. And I'll just ask you the same question I asked the governor there. Is this going to change the equation of the midterms? Democrats would clearly like it to, but what's the likelihood of that happening?
I think it really is state dependent. And I say this and meaning, let me give you an example. Nevada is one of the big battleground states in 2022. Abortion rights is enshrined in that state constitution. The Republican nominee for the Senate has already talked about, hey, it's enshrined in the Constitution, no debate here. I'm not saying you won't see Nevada Democrats want to, fire up Democrats on the issue of abortion, but it is good. You're going to hear, it is not at risk in Nevada. But Michigan and Wisconsin, it is going to be front and center, particularly in the governor's races in both of those places because of those trigger laws. And it really, so the political fallout to this, look, I think it's certainly going to help the Democrats find a way to sort of to fire up the Democratic base and fire up people on this issue. Sort of what I would say is it's not going to level the enthusiasm playing field. The right's fired up right now, believing they have a chance at winning a control of Congress, pushing back against Biden, the economy, the shaky economy that we're in right now with inflation. They certainly have those advantages. But I think this is a beginning of a leveling of the playing field, if you will, politically on the activism front and on the enthusiasm front. But again, I think it is more acute in places like Michigan and Wisconsin. And here's another thing, Lester, to think about. So for the longest time, politicians, elected officials have been able to duck specifics on the abortion issue. They've simply said, I'm for Roe or I'm against Roe. If anything, it would be the Democrats that would get sort of wedged. Well, what about late-term abortions? Is it 20 weeks? Is it 24 weeks? But there was not a debate on that front, and the Republicans didn't have to think about those nuances. Well, now sort of the roles are going to be reversed, and every candidate for every elective office for a legislative body is going to have to get specific. Okay, what are you open to? And that's where I think you're going to see probably more divides on the right than on the left. And you're going to see a lot of, look what we've seen with the gun debate. John Cornyn, tiptoed into gun regulations, and the former president called him a rhino. If you're an elected Republican and you wanted Roe overturned, but you believe there still should be access to abortion, is that politically feasible in this Republican Party today? And those are the type of potential wedging and political fallout here. I think the political consequences of this that I think you will see play out. I think that Republicans are not as unified at banning all abortions as the judiciary, that the conservative judges are pushing, or even some of the most hardcore sort of elected state legislators are pushing. But are they going to sort of run and hide on this, and are those divides going to sort of roil Republican Party politics in a way that we haven't seen before? So I just think that that's among the political consequences. Look, there's a lot of consequences to that, but just on the political side of it, that's one I'm focused on.
Yeah, and Chuck, we've already heard some Democrats trying to whip up folks with the idea that it may not stop here, that gay marriage could be back up for another consideration. Now, Justice Alito tried to address that in the opinion, saying, well, those other things don't involve a life. But is that going to be a genuine fear, and it is one, do you think, that Democrats will go to try and animate the base?
Oh, I think Clarence Thomas just handed them that opportunity, because in his concurring opinion, he put Griswold, he put Lawrence, those cases that enshrined rights to contraception and enshrined same-sex marriage into law. So the fact is, it doesn't matter what Alito wrote. Thomas wrote that. And by the way, in the Bush, the first time we saw this sort of in this century, it was during the Bush v. Gore decision, when the majority said this should not be precedent. And it doesn't matter what you say. A ruling is precedent. You could say it shouldn't be, but that's not up to you. And so I think it's a legitimate, I think it's going to be a legitimate fear that those on the left bring up, because again, they're not making it up. Justice Thomas wrote it in his concurring opinion. And so I think it will be, and there will be some state legislatures. I believe Idaho already had some legislation in the works on contraception. So, and I think that is where I think this is going to roil conservative primary politics in ways that I don't think we fully appreciate just yet.
All right, Chuck, let me go back to Pete Williams, if I can. Pete's got some more information for us.
Yes, a couple of things, Lester. First of all, on that question of the Supreme Court decision today casting doubt on other precedents like contraception, like same-sex marriage, the dissenters say today, the majority can't have it both ways. Either the logic of their decision, the dissenters say, this is the opinion that the three of them wrote together, either the logic is that a right has to be deeply rooted in the tradition, or the words of their dissent, don't worry, this won't count. It's one way or the other, and they say this is hypocritical. The majority tells us not to worry, they say, but either the mass of the opinion is hypocrisy or additional constitutional rights are under threat. It can't be both. It's one or the other. Also, Lester, Attorney General Merrick Garland is out with a statement today. He says the Justice Department strongly disagrees with the decision. It's a long statement, but I think the key part of it is this. He says women who reside in states that have banned access to comprehensive reproductive care must remain free to seek care in states where it's legal. And he also says under First Amendment principles, people must remain free to inform and counsel each other about the reproductive care that's available in other states. And indeed, one of the things that the dissenters say here, Lester, is there's nothing in today's decision to prevent states from doing that. They worry that it's something that states might do. And the dissenters also say, you know, there's nothing in today's decision. While the majority speaks of leaving this up to the states and returning this issue to the states, that's sort of how Justice Alito frames his decision. The dissent say there's nothing in this decision that would prevent Congress from banning abortion nationwide, Lester.
All right, Pete, thank you. I want to go back to Hallie Jackson right now. Hallie's got more reaction to the decision.
Yeah, and this is coming in from former President Donald Trump, Lester, who in many ways is central to the decision that we are seeing today, because it was, of course, the justices appointed under his administration that he selected that were confirmed during his time in office that ultimately have proven to be the deciding factors here in overturning Roe versus Wade. I want to be clear about where we're getting this from. This is former President Trump in an article speaking apparently with Fox News in an article that Fox News has posted online. So Donald Trump tells Fox that this decision is following the Constitution and giving rights back when they should have been given long ago, he says. He goes on to say this brings everything back to the states where it has always belonged. And when asked whether he feels he played a role in the reversal of Roe, again, given the backdrop that we just laid out, Lester, the justices appointed by him under his administration, he said God made the decision. That's what he told Fox. He also went on to say, you know, what his message would be to his own supporters who are pro-choice. Keep in mind that the former president has hinted very strongly that he is going to run again in 2024 to try to recapture the presidency. So there obviously is a political component to the way that he is viewing this decision as well. And so when Fox asked about what he would tell his supporters who are pro-choice, the former president said this, and I want to quote it here. He says, "I think in the end, this is something that will work out for everybody." I think it's incredibly unclear what the former president means by that, because this is a decision that carries the weight of the Supreme Court, Lester, the highest court in the land that has now effectively overturned Roe. And in half the states, roughly, you will see abortions not become a legal procedure for women who are seeking those procedures. They will have to travel. That is just the fact of the matter, that it is laid out in front of us right now as we speak today, Lester. So I think there's more questions to answer on that front, too, and to explore. When you look at the landscape of 2024, we've talked a lot about the midterms and the way that abortion rights and anti-abortion and abortion access advocates are going to be making this something that they hope will motivate voters. That goes twice, right, for what we're going to see in 2024 in that presidential race, Lester.
Yeah, and Shaka, if you're with us here, we don't lose sight of the fact that this is a court that was shaped in tremendous ways by Donald Trump.
And Mitch McConnell. I mean, you know, remember, you could argue that 2 of the 3 appointees that Donald Trump had were sort of done out of bounds, right? The first one was a vacancy that occurred basically with nearly a year left on Barack Obama's term. And then, you know, whatever precedent Mitch McConnell came up with to somehow say that that couldn't be filled until after the presidential election. He didn't believe it when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died essentially a month before the 2020 election. So you had this. So you know, I think there's a lot of folks who feel as if Gorsuch and Barrett, 2 of the 5 on this opinion, were sort of there unfairly or sort of out of bounds. Now, it's technically was done within the bounds of the Constitution, but was it ethical how it was done? Was it sort of, you know, and I think that that's what's going to, why there is, I think, such anger, more anger than normal. But I'll tell you, it is Donald Trump's legacy, and I find his discomfort with his legacy on this to be fascinating. I mean, he really is sort of new to this. He's been on both sides of this issue. When he was a politician, when he tried to enter the political arena in the late 90s, early 2000s, he'd talk about how pro-choice he was. And, you know, and then all of a sudden he had to adopt this pro-life language, political language. Wasn't very good at it. There's a famous exchange he had with our former colleague, Chris Matthews, where he started talking about, okay, if you're going to criminalize it, then, and he said, you know, you may have to charge the woman who has the abortion, and then of course he ends up having to walk that back. But it was a reminder that he's just unfamiliar. He never was really deeply informed or passionate on the life side of things, and that reaction, that sort of word salad reaction that he's had on all this, I think tells you he's likely very uncomfortable with this, but he doesn't know how to communicate it. You and I both know Donald Trump very well. If he thought, there's a part of me that's The fact that he's not spiking the football, hey, I'm the one who overturned Roe, tells you how uncomfortable he is, because he likes to spike the football and take a lot of credit for things when they're done by people he's appointed, and he's not on this one, which I think tells you how uncomfortable and really that this was not what he wanted to do on that front.
Interesting thought. Yamiche Alcindor still with us. Yamiche, we hear the term all the time, elections have consequences. Will Democrats run with that, though, to really try and excite their voters?
Certainly Democrats will be saying to voters, abortion is the thing to have on the top of your mind when you think about how rights can be taken away from you and why elections have consequences. Former President Trump made the case that he could be the Republican nominee and that he would carry the torch of Republican goals into the White House and into the Supreme Court. And that's how he got to be president of the United States, with a lot of evangelicals in particular telling me at the time that they were very, very worried about former President Trump. And now you see him sort of, as Chuck just said, clumsily, somewhat taking credit for this, but it is a credit that he has to take because he was the one who delivered this generational goal to conservatives, a culmination of so much work. I will also just say that Democrats, of course, will be making the case in the midterms for sure that their candidates need to be elected in order to reverse this.
Yeah, Yamiche, thank you very much. Want to let our viewers know some of you will be leaving us here to join your midday local news. Others will continue the coverage here on NBC News. Overturn Roe in a 5-4 vote. It is a victory for abortion opponents, many celebrating outside the court at this hour. But it is not a total surprise to supporters of abortion rights. They have been bracing for the loss after an early draft of the opinion was leaked back in May. They call it an assault on reproductive freedoms of women. The ruling came in a dispute over a law passed in Mississippi's Republican-controlled legislature to ban abortions after 15 weeks. And in just about a half hour, we expect a briefing or comments from President Biden about today's decision. We will carry that, of course. Let's go right to NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, I said it a moment ago, notably 5-4 the vote here.
5-4 on the key question of overturning Roe and the follow-on decision called Planned Parenthood v. Casey that said that states cannot ban abortion before viability. That's roughly 23 weeks into the pregnancy. So that is gone. And the court did that in upholding by a vote of 6-3 the law that brought this issue to the Supreme Court, Mississippi's law that would ban abortion after 15 weeks. So the court upheld that law and by a 5-4 vote overturned Roe v. Wade. So this doesn't make abortion illegal nationwide. It simply removes, and I say simply, it removes the constitutional protection for abortion. There's no longer a constitutional right to abortion, according to the Supreme Court. This is the first time in history that the Supreme Court has ever granted a right that is widely recognized and then taken away. It's technically speaking not the first time the court has ever granted a right and taken it away, but it's the first time it's ever done that for a right that had widespread public support and was widely recognized. So it's now up to the states to decide whether to make abortion illegal, and by our count, roughly half the states will do so. 13 of those states already have laws on the book, so-called trigger laws, that make abortion illegal if the court ever were to overturn Roe and Casey. Missouri is already the first of the states to take that action. As of today, the Attorney General of Missouri says abortion is now illegal in that state. The majority opinion was written by Justice Samuel Alito. It closely tracks with the leaked opinion that came out in May that was actually drafted in February that said Roe was egregiously wrong, that there's no constitutional right to abortion in the Constitution, and the only way a constitutional right can be derived from the Constitution's 14th Amendment if it is deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions and part of the concept of ordered liberty. Roe flunks that test, the court said. There is no requirement in the Supreme Court's decision today for states to make an exception in their laws banning abortion for rape and incest. It doesn't say they have to, it doesn't say they can't, but the dissenters point out today that that is a big problem with the majority opinion. Justice Kavanaugh says he believes, in joining the majority, that the states cannot restrict travel. Now, that's only his opinion, but because he's one of the 5 Without him, it'd only be 4. It wouldn't be a majority, so that opinion has controlling force. So by Justice Kavanaugh's logic, states cannot restrict travel. They cannot make it illegal for women to go from a state that bans abortion to a state that doesn't in order to receive the care. That's a point that Attorney General Merrick Garland has made in a statement. He says states shouldn't be able to do that, and he also says under the First Amendment, people should be free to get counsel about reproductive care that's available in other states. That shouldn't be illegal. The dissenters, Justice Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan, filed a long and impassioned joint dissent. And let me just summarize what they say. They say the Supreme Court says that from the very moment of fertilization, a woman has no rights to speak of. A state can force her to bring a pregnancy to term, even at the steepest personal and familial cost, Lester.
All right, Pete Williams, thank you very much. We have, from the very beginning of the morning when the decision was announced, we've watched that crowd outside the Supreme Court, passionate protesters on both sides of this issue. Let's bring in NBC's Maura Barrett, who was in the crowds. Maura?
Lester, when you talk about passionate protesters, we're seeing some of the tension actually right behind me, where 2 groups of protesters, some that support the right to an abortion, some that are against it, just wrapped up a pretty heated argument. And that's something that we had seen throughout the week here as we expected the decision to come down, as well as this morning, to the extent that police had to get involved and establish a peaceful protest line, is what they said that they were attempting to do. But right when the decision came down, a few minutes at 10:10 a.m. Eastern time, there was a group of people who were overjoyed, jumping up and down, celebrating, cheering, and crying tears of joy. One woman telling me that she was overjoyed, and it was this massive feeling of relief for her. I spoke with another young woman who opposed the right to an abortion because she has family members who have had abortions, she told me, and then they regretted it the rest of their lives, and so she wanted to make sure that babies' rights were protected, as she told me. And so we did see the crowd balloon here in the last couple of hours. There was probably about 100 or 150 or so initially this morning, and there are just hundreds, if not 1,000 or more here right now. You can see the people as my photographer Ronnie walks around here. They are largely people that did support the right for an abortion. We did see hundreds of people, younger people in red, the Students for Life group that actually just left the area and are marching around the Supreme Court now. But I want you to hear directly from Michelle. She is a protester that was just standing here, and I want you to say hello. She has, when I came up and said hello to her, she was wearing a piece of tape over her mouth that said second-class citizen, and I saw a group of you put those on shortly after the decision came down. What does this decision mean to you today, and were you surprised given that the draft had leaked earlier this year?
We are not surprised. We are still concerned and very alarmed about this decision. As a non-Christian, I see this as religious rule, and I see it as nothing more than men and religious organizations attempting to control women's bodies.
And tell me a little bit, I mean, how are you feeling? Do you have hope for progress moving forward? What are you looking to see in the country now?
Yeah, there's always hope. I think our best bet is legislatively, but unfortunately, people are going to die. Women are going to die between now and when we can get legislation passed, which is untenable, and I don't know how we've let it get to this point. It's just very disappointing.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And to Michelle's point there, talking about women dying, that's a repeated thing I've heard from people here who had strongly supported the right to an abortion. I just met this woman, Hannah, who is 66 years old. She said she was in high school when Roe v. Wade initially passed. And prior to that, she had heard stories in her home state of Washington where girls had disappeared looking to get abortions, stories of knitting needles, some very graphic stories. And she expressed such disappointment in knowing that the country, in her mind, could be going back to that. And she also elaborated, saying that she hopes that, if anything, this is what drives people to vote in the midterms come November. Lester.
All right, Maura, thanks. Watching those crowds outside the Supreme Court. Let's go to our chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander. Peter, we should be hearing from the president very shortly here.
Yeah, that's right. We expect to hear from him about 20 minutes from now at 12:30 in the Cross Hall inside the White House residence. When we're done with this conversation, I'm going to head inside in anticipation that the president may take reporters' questions. But I have to tell you, I've been inside the West Wing at points over the day, and for a lot of members of this White House staff, this was a gut punch in many ways. They anticipated this ruling, though they didn't think it would come as early as today. But in the words of one aide, they described it as a heavy day and a devastating decision. We've yet to hear from President Biden, though we will hear from him shortly. But top Democrats have already described this, in the words of Chuck Schumer, as being one of the darkest days in our country's history. Nancy Pelosi describing this ruling as a slap in the face to women in this country. So just gives you a little bit of a sense of where they are on this. There's been a lot of pressure on the president from abortion rights advocates to announce plans, what he can do through executive actions to help try to expand access to reproductive health care right now. His ability is certainly limited, but we are told by a senior administration official that the president will lay out what, if any, plans the administration has in place right now. Just a short time ago, though we haven't heard from the president, we did hear from his Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who released a statement that said the Justice Department strongly disagrees with the court's decision. Few rights are more central to individual freedom than the right to control one's own body. And he adds, the Justice Department will use every tool at our disposal to protect reproductive freedom. Among the desires of those abortion rights advocates are that the president perhaps would expand access to reproductive health care on federal lands that the federal government controls. And beyond that, that the president may have additional announcements as it relates to increasing access to abortion medication, abortion pills. Right now, a majority of the abortions in this country are done with abortion medication. And there's new reporting that also indicates that nearly 1 in 4 women in this country by the age of 45 will have had an abortion. You've seen the public polling, Lester. Right now, about 60% of Americans, according to the most recent NBC News poll, believe that abortion should be legal or mostly legal. About 37% say that abortion should be illegal, either with exceptions or without exceptions. And one of the biggest concerns for the White House right now is as it relates to those who are most likely to be most impacted by this. That is, people who are poor, low-income individuals, individuals from minority communities. Specifically right now, even before the Roe v. Wade ruling today in parts of the South and the Midwest, access to an abortion was already a struggle for many of those individuals who had limited access to clinics and due to restrictions that existed in many of those places, including and sometimes from insurance coverage and beyond. So we anticipate that the president will be laying out in some form what, if anything, he plans to do here. He'll be speaking on camera again before he heads overseas to Europe. I'm told that his remarks for today had been pre-prepared, although senior staff, I'm told, was meeting with him in the White House Oval Office just a matter of moments ago to make any last-minute changes, but they certainly did anticipate that this ruling was in the pipeline. Lester.
All right, Peter Alexander, we're about 20 minutes away now from the president's scheduled remarks on all this. In the meantime, let's go to congressional correspondent Ali Vitale, who's on Capitol Hill. Ali, you could argue that the roads now lead through the Capitol as to next steps and what happens in all this. What are you hearing?
Well, the roads would lead through the Capitol on this, Lester. Only Democrats tried and previously failed to pass a bill that would have codified federal protections for abortion access. They did that right after that leaked Supreme Court draft decision. They've known that this was coming. It's why we see Senate Democrats demanding President Biden take several specific executive actions. Peter was laying out some of them, things like shoring up access to the abortion pill, trying to crack down on data brokers who might be selling information of people as they go to abortion clinics, also making sure that there are resources available to women and people who want to access abortion care if they have to travel out of state to do it. But frankly, the federal government piece of this is hamstrung in terms of their ability to act right now. It's why the lawmakers that I've been speaking to all turn their eyes to the states. It's something that they're also pushing ahead to the midterm elections. And we've seen this in our polling data. The fact that this was not a priority for American voters because it's been settled precedent for 49 years. We've seen, though, in recent weeks, since that leaked draft opinion, the fact that this is becoming a bigger priority to voters, seeing upwards of 15 and 16-point swings in terms of how important this is going to be in the election coming up. And it's something that every single lawmaker here has said to me, the emotion that Peter is talking about, that he's seeing at the White House right now. I'm seeing that from lawmakers and staffers who are here in the halls of Congress. As I've been texting with lawmakers today on the Democratic side of the aisle, they are angry, they are enraged, and they say that they are ready to fight. And what they mean by fight, again, is not a legislative avenue, because they tried that and it has failed. Instead, they're going to continue trying to galvanize their voters, urging them to get out in the states and vote, because now this issue that had long been theoretical is now real, a completely untested principle on an issue that we have seen energize voters for decades in theory, and now November is the moment that we actually see it in practice. Lester?
It is real indeed. Ali Vitale, thank you. And joining us now, NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson, who's been monitoring reaction. Hallie?
And some of this, Lester, is about looking ahead, but it's also looking at the many decades of this precedent of Roe versus Wade having existed. You look at the dissent, and there is a quote where they write, "After today, young women will come of age with fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers had." And that speaks to the generational impact of this decision. So today, we think it's important to take a look not just at what's next, but at how we got here.
For 50 years, it's been the flashpoint at the center of American politics.
When you have an abortion, you're murdering your own child.
We're not going to be pushed back into a period of back alley abortions.
And the case that loomed over every Supreme Court nomination battle.
Do you expect to overrule the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision?
I don't think it would be proper for me to answer that.
Something central to a woman's life.
It's been reaffirmed many times.
All Supreme Court cases are precedential.
In 1970, a pregnant Norma McCorvey, known as Jane Roe, to protect her identity, filed a class action suit against the district attorney of Dallas County, Texas, Henry Wade. The suit took aim at the existing abortion ban in Texas that only allowed a pregnancy to be terminated to save a woman's life.
The United States Supreme Court, it handed down a historic decision about abortion.
In 1973, the court ruled in Roe's favor in a 7-2 decision.
The freedom to have an abortion is now legal in every state,
declaring abortion as a constitutional right, citing in part a personal right to privacy. It stopped states from banning the procedure before fetal viability, the point in a pregnancy when a fetus can survive outside the womb. After the ruling, the number of reported abortions rose across the nation, from 14 legal abortions per every 1,000 women in 1973 to a high of 25 legal abortions per every 1,000 women in 1980, according to the CDC. The most recent reporting from 2019 shows more than 629,000 legal abortions that year. Roe v. Wade radically transformed the political landscape. The two opposing sides in the abortion rights debate growing into powerful political movements. As recently as 2020, a Gallup poll found 1 in 4 Americans considered abortion to be a key voting issue. The topic playing a part in every major presidential election of the last 40 years.
What single issue could say more about a society's values?
This difficult and painful decision should be left to the women.
Have a God-given right to life.
I support a woman's right to choose.
Over the years, the Supreme Court approved restrictions that chipped away at Roe versus Wade, including limits on abortion procedures for ultrasound exams and counseling. But the constitutional right to abortion remained for nearly 50 years.
That is, of course, until today. And this landmark decision now by the Supreme Court, as we take a look at the screen at the number of protesters, demonstrators who have gathered outside the court on, frankly, a day that is making history, a day that has already gone down in history. That's how we got here, what you just heard over the last couple of minutes. So when you look at what's next, the immediate impact is going to happen on the state level. 13 states, we've talked about this, they have trigger laws in place that would basically outright ban abortion. Some of the states do have exceptions for for example, rape and incest. Some do not. You also have 10 other states that would not outright ban abortion, but would severely restrict it. For example, preventing any abortion procedures from, let's say, 6 weeks to 20 weeks, both of which are below the line of what's considered fetal viability, generally thought to be around 24 weeks, when a fetus could survive outside the womb. That is the immediate landscape that we are looking at here at the end of June. As we then look ahead to the political impact, too, leading up to not just the November midterms, but to 2024 as well. A majority of Americans did not want to see Roe versus Wade overturned. 63% did not. 30% thought that it should be. So roughly a third of America, based on this NBC News polling from just last month, believes that this was the right decision by the court. And frankly, they are celebrating today. For others, particularly Democrats that we've heard from here during this special report, as I've been talking to folks as well, they are feeling, I think, very demoralized. On the political component, too, I was just texting with somebody, a contact of mine in South Carolina, a critical state as we look ahead to 2024, particularly on the Republican side. And they are framing it to me as now, from a politics perspective, this going to catalyze conservative versus even further right. Where are Republican candidates, particularly when you look at the presidential election, on that spectrum of limiting abortion access? How far do some of those candidates go? And I think that's a point we're thinking about as we move forward, Lester.
All right, Hallie, thanks for walking us through all that. Jennifer Mascott is an assistant law professor at George Mason University. She clerked for both Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh. For Kavanaugh, it was at the circuit level. I want to thank you for joining us. Your insight is extraordinarily valuable right now. Can you talk about how Justice Alito arrived at this decision and the theory that his guiding force here?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me on. I think it's important to note that for 185 years after the founding of this country, the court had not weighed in on abortion. And so, of course, it did in Roe versus Wade. And I think what Justice Alito's opinion does today is look back at the text and structure of the Constitution, at history, and note that abortion really was not addressed in the text of the Constitution. And what the court did today, the majority of the justices, I think most fundamentally, is acknowledge that it is not going to take a one-size-fits-all approach to deciding this issue for the American people any longer. It's taken itself out of the seat of power and recognizing that this is an issue that people have strong views on both sides. And so it's something that's left up to states, local representatives, the people themselves to reach decisions on. Of course, the Roe versus Wade decision itself and its justification has been changed a number of times by the court over the years and has been criticized for many years. And so I think the court also looked and at the traditional factors that it examines when it looks at precedent and said this was a decision that was sort of suspect from the beginning. And as we can see from the protests today and some of the threats and the leak itself, when the Supreme Court several decades ago took for itself the role of deciding some of these issues for the American people, it's led to a lot of politicization of the body. And so I think today's decision really restores the rule of law and, again, makes the court, again, a neutral body, looking just at the text and structure of the Constitution and properly leaving really tough issues to the American people.
Let me ask you about the door that has been left open, regardless of what Justice Alito said, that door being there are other rights that have been granted that could be reviewed and overturned here. How real do you think that threat is?
Not real. I mean, Justice Kavanaugh addresses this in his separate opinion, which, as commentators have noted already on the network this morning, his was one of 5 votes required for the opinion. But I think it just states the obvious point that, of course, the particular issue before the court today was the question of abortion. The court's opinion, with Justice Alito writing, talks about the very critical aspect of the other right at play here, the right of the fetus, and so the balancing of interest here. Of course, as a practical matter, people would have to tee up litigation to raise the other issues. But I think also Justice Alito's extensive discussion of stare decisis is something that would need to be contended with in future decisions. So, of course, Justice Thomas notes in his separate opinion that just on the constitutional reasoning alone of text and precedent, of course, there are many other decisions of the court recently that might be questioned under those standards.
And that's the door I mentioned.
But as far as the will to challenge it, and then again, Justice Alito's opinion seems to me quite clear that Roe was a particularly egregious case under precedent. And so I find it extremely unlikely that any time in the foreseeable future, some of the other issues would be challenged. And in fact, some of the justices and folks themselves in particular, some of the more far-flung questions about contraception, I think there's no will. And in fact, many of the justices perhaps who join the majority opinion today would actually not come down the same way on some of those other cases. Right. So I think
Jennifer,
those things are going to stay in place for now.
Yeah, thank you for being with us and sharing your insight. We appreciate it. Nancy Northup is the president and CEO of the Center for Reproductive Rights. The center argued this case at the Supreme Court on behalf of the Mississippi Abortion Clinic. I thank you for being with us. Obviously, the decision we see today mirrors what we saw in that draft back in May. So clearly you were prepared for this moment.
Well, it's devastating nonetheless. I mean, the court in its decision today turned its back on the rule of law. It turned its back on women. It has set back women's rights for more than 50 years. And it's taken away a personal liberty. And it's the first time the Supreme Court has ever done that. So the consequences of today's decision are going to be swift and devastating. And we're going to see utter chaos in the days and weeks ahead. And there is this sense of mobilization, of not laying down, of fighting going forward. But for the time being, what happens in the fight for abortion rights? Well, I think you're going to see incredible mobilization. I mean, today you're going to see people coming out across the country. I think you're going to continue to see that. For those of us who work on law and policy, this is not the end of the story. There are three branches of government, so we'll be looking both to the Congress, the Women's Health Protection Act. Congress can fix this. We'll be looking to the Biden administration to do what it can within its powers to preserve access to abortion care. And we'll be looking to the states. Every state has its own constitution and its own laws and can protect access. And we have litigation going on right now on state constitutional protections for abortion rights. And we'll also be seeking to not let those trigger laws go into effect, which purport to be able to have Roe versus, with Roe versus Wade's overturning, to have abortion immediately banned. We'll be looking to every single legal lever to stop this horrific situation from going into effect.
Nancy, my colleague Chuck Todd has a question for you.
Nancy, I want to follow up on that. Let's get specific here. There are a couple of actions that some folks are looking to the Biden administration that they think is possible are within his power. One is figuring out a way to the so-called abortion pill, making sure that that's available widely. What kind of administrative what do you need from the administration to guarantee that? And the other thing was something the Attorney General said in his statement, which is he wants to make sure that First Amendment rights aren't being blocked when it comes to informing people that they can travel out of state to get an abortion and they can do this. What specifically do you need to see from the Biden administration in an executive order or action here that could guarantee that in the short term?
Well, I think that what is going to be a reality, because we're going to see in vast swaths of the South and the Midwest abortion become illegal, is that we're going to have a public health emergency. And I think the Biden administration can look to its powers under a public health emergency to be able to get medication abortion to be prescribed to people in those states. It is known the effects and the health effects and the burdens of when abortion is criminalized. We see that around the world. We see it in history. And so we are going to have a public health crisis, and we're going to need to have medication abortion be able to be delivered to people in those states. So I think that is one of the things to be looking at quite strongly. And as you point out, people are also going to have to travel to other states. And those states are getting ready to be able to have people come to the states, and they want to make sure that, they are supportive of abortion rights as essential health care in their states, and are not going to want to see the doctors in their states providing care to be somehow caught up in the attempt by other states to stop people from leaving.
What are the next battle lines in this as far as you're concerned? People are questioning about contraceptives. Where do you think you'll be putting up your defenses?
Well, I think we have to look to, the Supreme Court has protected these fundamental decisions about our personal liberty. This is the realm of the home, contraception, when and whether to have children, who we marry. All of this has been protected as a fundamental personal liberty under the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court just kicked out a key decision from 50 years ago, which many other decisions have been built upon. And the notion that it can't destroy the constitutional fabric for these decisions is just not correct. And so we're, of course, going to be looking to reestablish what all of us in this country believe, which is that these are intensely personal decisions that in a free society, people want to make for themselves, who they marry, when and whether to have children. These are personal decisions for us to decide in a free country.
All right, Nancy Northup, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Let me go back to Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, walk me through the mechanics. So that the ruling has come down. Does everything change immediately? We talked about these trigger laws in some states. Is this happening right now?
It is happening right now, and in some states it is immediate. And according to either the attorney generals or the governors of 4 states, abortion is now illegal in Missouri, South Dakota, Louisiana, and Kentucky. The 3 of them, South Dakota, Louisiana, and Kentucky, were so-called trigger law states. Missouri recently just changed its law. So now those 4 states, abortion is illegal in those. In some of the other states, this happens in a series of rollouts. So, for example, in 10 days, abortion will become illegal in Mississippi now that Roe has been decided. In another 30 days in Texas, Idaho, and Tennessee. And then in the rest of the 13 trigger law states, it will become illegal. And we think, Lester, that eventually, within the next several months, abortion will be illegal in roughly half the country, in 24 states. It will remain legal in the other states. And as you just mentioned, some of the questions now to be resolved are, will states try to criminalize traveling, going from one state to another? As I read the Supreme Court decision today, Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence, which is controlling, is he says states cannot constitutionally make that a crime. They can't ban people who live in non-abortion states from going to states where the procedure is available. And then the question is, what about getting counseling? What about getting counseling in your state? Is that going to be considered a crime? So there are lots of legal questions yet to be resolved. But you're right, it is happening immediately, and it's going to roll out here over the next several weeks.
All right, Pete, thanks. It's 12:30 in the East right now. This is the time that we are expecting the president to come out and make remarks in front of the camera. 12:30, the scheduled time, obviously not quite there yet, but there's the setup, reporters standing by, hopefully able to ask the president some questions. So we will go back there as soon as he gets underway. Meantime, Blaine Alexander is in Jackson, Mississippi, where the state's only abortion clinic is located. It's the very same clinic that went to court to challenge the Mississippi abortion ban at the heart of today's decision. Blaine, what are you hearing there today?
Yeah. Well, Lester, that clinic is only about a mile or so away from where I'm standing. It's Jackson Women's Health Organization, the very clinic that's at the center of this entire ruling. We expect to hear from them in a press conference later today at about 4 o'clock Eastern time. You know, this is something that if you drive by this clinic, it's something that has women who actually stand outside, who actually kind of protect the women who go in, who go behind this gate to get abortion services at this clinic. They're called the Pink House Defenders. They take their job very seriously. You also see a number of protesters on any given day. So this is a place that really has been at the center of this kind of polarizing debate for quite some time. And even after that leaked draft opinion came out, some people who worked there, Lester, in speaking with them over the past few weeks, were still holding out hope. They said that it wasn't set in stone, that it wasn't a done deal. Of course, all of that changes today. So we're going to hear from them later this afternoon for the first time since this decision came down. But Lester, I've got to say, talking to people on both sides of the issue, it's very clear that really there is almost kind of a weight that comes with the fact that this ruling came from the state of Mississippi. When you speak with people who have been fighting for years to dismantle Roe, to end abortion access, they almost speak with a sense of pride about the fact that it comes from the state of Mississippi. One woman told me that she is absolutely in tears. She feels like it's a surreal moment, and she calls it just the beginning. But if you go to the other side, people who are fighting to protect abortion rights here in the state of Mississippi, this is an angry day. This is a very sad day for some of them. And they point to the specifics of Mississippi Mississippi. As one woman told me not too long ago, she says that women, specifically black women here in the state, are going to suffer. This is a state, when you kind of just look at the numbers, they're rather stunning, Lester. 38% of the population here are black women, but they account for about 75% of abortions in the state of Mississippi. That's a stunning statistic. That's a stunning number. And they say that black women are going to be the ones who really suffer. The other thing I want to touch on, Lester, is the timing here. You know, there is a 10-day gap between when the Attorney General here in the state of Mississippi says that the law has officially been triggered before abortions become illegal. So when I was speaking with some abortion rights advocates, they say they're going to use that 10-day gap. They're going to be putting out education. They're going to be telling women that, hey, your rights are still intact for the time being, but also letting them know that the landscape is about to change vastly. But overall, Lester, there is a very strong sense of resignation among some of those women who have been fighting to protect abortion rights here in Mississippi. Lester?
Okay, Blaine, thank you for that. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman is at the White House, where we expect to hear from the president at any moment now. Josh, do we know what the president will talk about? Obviously, he'll react to this, but what he will perhaps propose going forward in his power?
He will, Lester. Officials tell us that the president will start to lay out what he feels that the Biden administration can do to try to preserve the ability to get an abortion for as many women in the country as possible. Now, that is not going to look like an executive order that suddenly restores the right to an abortion nationwide. That is something that is outside of President Biden's power. Only Congress can do that. And so we expect to hear President Biden once again call on Congress to codify the right to an abortion, as well as for voters to choose lawmakers in the fall and in other elections who will vote to create and preserve the ability for women across the country to get abortions. But we also are told that the president will start to lay out what some of the federal agencies can do around the margins. There's nothing sweeping that he can do, but to try to make sure that as many women have access as possible. Things, for example, like what the Justice Department can do to preserve the ability for women to cross state lines if they live in a state where abortion is going to be prohibited and want to go somewhere else to seek access to abortion. Also making sure that the states cannot pass laws to try to outlaw certain medications for abortion that the FDA has already deemed to be safe and effective. Something we heard about in a statement that Attorney General Merrick Garland put out today, saying that he was deeply disappointed by the ruling, but that the Justice Department, working with the White House, FDA, and other agencies, will do everything it can to ensure the ability for women to access reproductive health rights. A significant moment for the president also politically as he tries to convey the sense of frustration and outrage that so many of his supporters are now voicing today in the wake of this ruling. We are also learning just now, Lester, about Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, how she learned of this decision today. A White House official telling me that the First Lady was with none other than Republican Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida at the moment when she learned of this decision. DeSantis, a Republican who just in April signed a law banning abortion in Florida after 15 weeks of pregnancy. The First Lady was with him preparing to go on stage at a memorial for the Surfside collapse, the one-year anniversary of that tragedy, when she found out from alerts on her phone. A similar way to how many of the White House officials here learned of this decision today, something they had anticipated. They had already prepared some remarks for President Biden to deliver if the ruling came out this way, but still many expecting that it would not have necessarily come as early as today. And now White House officials trying to make sure they have everything lined up for President Biden to be able to communicate to the American people exactly what he feels he can do to try to make sure as many people as possible retain the ability to get reproductive health care, including abortions, Lester.
And Josh, we knew the ruling would come down perhaps today or tomorrow. The White House had no insight here, presumably, but we're prepared for this moment. And I'm assuming he's going to speak now really in forward-looking terms.
That's right, Lester. We expect President Biden to address the fact that this is now the reality. The Supreme Court has now said that there's not this constitutional right. And as we've been discussing, so many of these states will now have these laws triggered into effect. President Biden expected to address not only what his administration is going to do, but also what Americans who disagree with this Supreme Court decision should do going forward to make sure that they work toward preserving preserving and expanding the ability for women to access these rights as we see President Biden taking to the podium to speak right here.
Today is it's not hyperbole to suggest a very solemn moment. Today, the Supreme Court of the United States expressly took away a constitutional right from the American people that it had already recognized. They didn't limit it, they simply took it away. That's never been done to a right so important to so many Americans. But they did it. It's a sad day for the court and for the country. 50 years ago, Roe v. Wade was decided and has been the law of the land since then. This landmark case protected women's right to choose, her right to make intensely personal decisions with her doctor, free from the interference of politics. It reaffirmed basic principles of equality, that women have the power to control their own destiny, and it reinforced a fundamental right of privacy, a right of each of us to choose how to live our lives. Now, with Roe gone, let's be very clear. The health and life of women in this nation are now at risk. As chairman and ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, as vice president and now as president of the United States, I've studied this case carefully. I've overseen more Supreme Court confirmations than anyone today, where this case was always discussed. I believe Roe v. Wade was the correct decision as a matter of constitutional law and application of the fundamental right to privacy and liberty in matters of family and personal autonomy. It was a decision on a complex matter that drew a careful balance between a woman's right to choose earlier in her pregnancy and the state's ability to regulate later in her pregnancy. A decision with broad national consensus that most Americans of faith and backgrounds found acceptable, and that had been the law of the land for most of the lifetime of Americans today. And it was a constitutional principle upheld by justices appointed by Democrat and Republican presidents alike. Roe v. Wade was a 7-2 decision written by a justice appointed by a Republican president, Richard Nixon. In the 5 decades that followed Roe v. Wade, justices appointed by Republican presidents from Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan, George W. Bush, were among the justices who voted to uphold the principles set forth in Roe v. Wade. It was 3 justices named by one president, Donald Trump, who were the core of today's decision to upend the scales of justice and eliminate a fundamental right for women in this country. Make no mistake, this decision is a culmination of a deliberate effort over decades to upset the balance of our law. It's a realization of an extreme ideology and a tragic error by the Supreme Court, in my view. The court has done what it has never done before, expressly take away a constitutional right that is so fundamental to so many Americans that had already been recognized. The court's decision to do so will have real and immediate consequences. State laws banning abortion are automatically taking effect today, jeopardizing the health of millions of women, some without exceptions. So extreme that women could be punished for protecting their health. So extreme that women and girls who are forced to bear their rapist's child, with the child a consequence. It just stuns me. So extreme that doctors will be criminalized for fulfilling their duty to care. Imagine having a young woman have to carry the child of incest as a consequence of incest. No option. Too often the case. The poor women are going to be hit the hardest. It's cruel. In fact, the court laid out state laws criminalizing abortion that go back to the 1800s as rationale. The court literally taking America back 150 years. This is a sad day for the country, in my view. But it doesn't mean the fight's over. Let me be very clear and unambiguous. The only way we can secure a woman's right to choose and the balance that existed is for Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade as federal law. No executive action from the president can do that. And if Congress, as it appears, lacks the votes to do that now, voters need to make their voices heard. This fall, we must elect more senators and representatives who will codify women's right to choose into federal law once again. Elect more state leaders to protect this right at the local level. We need to restore the protections of Roe as law of the land. We need to elect officials who will do that. This fall, Roe is on the ballot. Personal freedoms are on the ballot. The right to privacy, liberty, equality, they're all on the ballot. Until then, I will do all of my power to protect a woman's right in states where they will face the consequences of today's decision. While the court's decision cast a dark shadow over a large swath of the land, many states in this country still recognize a woman's right to choose. So, if a woman lives in a state that restricts abortion, the Supreme Court's decision does not prevent her from traveling from her home state to the state that allows it. It does not prevent a doctor in that state from treating her. As the Attorney General has made clear, women must remain free to travel safely to another state to seek care they need. And my administration will defend that bedrock right. If any state or local official, high or low, tries to interfere with a woman's exercising her basic right to travel, I will do everything in my power to fight that deeply un-American attack. My administration will also protect a woman's access to medications that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, like contraception, which is essential for preventative health care, mifepristone, which the FDA approved 20 years ago to safely end early pregnancies and is commonly used to treat miscarriages. Some states are saying that they'll try to ban or severely restrict access to these medications. But extremist governors and state legislators are looking to block the mail or search a person's medicine cabinet or control a woman's actions by tracking data on her apps she uses are wrong and extreme and out of touch with the majority of Americans. The American Medical Association, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists wrote to me and Vice President Harris stressing that these laws are not based on evidence and asking us to act to protect access to care. They say by limiting access to these medicines, maternal mortality will climb in America. That's what they say. Today, I'm directing the Department of Health and Human Services to take steps to ensure these critical medications are available to the fullest extent possible. And the politicians cannot interfere in the decisions that should be made between a woman and her doctor. And my administration will remain vigilant as the implications of this decision play out. I've warned about how this decision risks the broader right to privacy for everyone. That's because Roe recognized the fundamental right to privacy that has served as a basis for so many more rights that we've come to take for granted, that are ingrained in the fabric of this country. The right to make the best decisions for your health. The right to use birth control, a married couple in the privacy of their bedroom, for God's sake. The right to marry the person you love. Now, Justice Thomas said as much today. He explicitly called to reconsider the right of marriage equality, the right of couples to make their choices on contraception. This extreme and dangerous path the court is now taking us on. Let me close with 2 points. First, I call on everyone, no matter how deeply they care about this decision, to keep all protests peaceful. Peaceful, peaceful, peaceful. No intimidation. Violence is never acceptable. Threats and intimidation are not speech. We must stand against violence in any form, regardless of your rationale. Second, I know so many of us are frustrated and disillusioned that the court has taken something away that's so fundamental. I know so many women are now going to face incredibly difficult situations. I hear you. I support you. I stand with you. The consequences and the consensus of the American people, core principles of equality, liberty, dignity, and the stability of the rule of law demand that Roe should not have been overturned. With this decision, the conservative majority of the Supreme Court shows how extreme it is, how far removed they are from the majority of this country. They've made the United States an outlier among developed nations in the world. But this decision must not be the final word. My administration will use all of its appropriate lawful powers, but Congress must act. And with your vote, you can act. You can have the final word. This is not over. Thank you very much. I have more to say this in weeks to come. Thank you.
President taking no questions, calling this a solemn day, recognizing he has few levers at his disposal to reverse what we saw take place today, calling on Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade, and at the same time calling on voters, saying Roe is on the ballot, so making a very clear and impassioned case for voters to recognize the consequences of their decision to vote or not. Let's bring in NBC News Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, did the president have anything else he could offer that maybe he didn't mention here?
Lester, this was one of the most important speeches that President Biden has made since he came into office, and it is on a topic that is politically very, very complicated for him because he does not have at his disposal anything that he can really do to reverse what the Supreme Court has done today, which is, of course, overturn Roe v. Wade, setting back precedent of nearly 50 years. The president, though, was mixing politics and passion here, of course. He was talking about the fact that this is tragic and cruel, saying that he is going to make sure that this is not over, also calling out the fact that these are people by name that he wanted to talk about. He hardly ever really talks about former President Trump by name, but today you heard him say that name because he wanted to focus the nation's attention to exactly how we got here. Because, of course, this is the culmination of decades of work by the conservative movement to make sure that abortion would be overturned and that there would be bans going into place across the nation. Something else that he said that was really, really important, and you got at it, and it's that personal freedoms he believes are on the ballot, because Democrats are now going to have to make the case that if they get power back and if they can hold on to power, that they will be able to try to give women in this country more access to abortion. But it's not really clear how they're going to do that. Talking to sources in the Democratic Party, they are scrambling and upset and devastated, but they don't actually know what to do at this point to really overturn what the Supreme Court has done here. And I should say I've been talking to the head of the women's clinic in Jackson, Mississippi, that is the center of this, and she told me just a few weeks ago that she has no hope that Congress or the president can help her in this moment, and that she does not believe that they're going to be able to do anything legislatively to hand back these rights to women. So it's really with that in mind that the president is making this pitch to the midterms and to really making sure that Democrats have something to talk about to try to make the case that they should win elections around this country, because conservatives are already making the case that they are celebrating that they can get things done. We already heard former President Trump say that he believes this is God's decision and that the Supreme Court is doing what should have been done a long time ago. So conservatives are already celebrating and thinking about what's next for them, and Democrats are doing the same. But Lester, what we heard from the president president today was one of the most impassioned speeches that he's ever given, and it's on a topic that is so complicated and so tough for him amid so many other challenges facing this White House.
Okay, Mish, thank you very much. Joining us now is Alexis McGill-Johnson, Planned Parenthood President and CEO. We appreciate you being with us. I just want to get your immediate reaction if you were able to hear the president. He seems to be acknowledging he doesn't have a lot of options as in his executive power and really turning to Congress. But as we know, that really is a bit of a non-starter. What are your thoughts?
Look, I think first and foremost, he's absolutely right. Roe is on the ballot, and we are clear about how we got here, right? Politicians who believe that they can make better decisions about our bodies than we can, and justices who essentially lied about their respect for precedent, 49 years of precedent to be precise. So I think that the president struck absolutely the right tone. We need a strong response from all levels of government, and centering the patient, centering the people who will be most impacted is critically important. We hope to see additional actions in the days to come, right? I mean, in addition to reaffirming the right to travel, we also need the administration to step in with getting people assistance to travel out of state for care, because we know these are the people who, for whom getting access to abortion care will become out of reach.
As we're speaking, there are states now that are making their decision to their trigger laws are going into effect. And we're seeing cases where some of these laws make exceptions for incest and rape. Others don't. We're hearing talk about whether certain contraceptives would maybe fall under the umbrella of things considered illegal. What are you defending right now? What is your biggest fear at this moment?
My biggest fear is that you're exactly right? That it is not just the criminalization of abortion provision, that there will be a criminalization of contraception, of IUDs, right? Of Plan B, emergency contraception, of IVF in some cases that have been introduced. That's our big worry about what happens. And obviously, we're concerned the patients who are seeking abortion today, right? The patients who are waking up today knowing that they can no longer get access to abortion. They are.
Alexis, thank you for being with us. Let me bring in Carol Tobias. She's the president of the National Right to Life Committee. Carol, we appreciate you joining us. The president, a few moments ago, really talked about this in terms of a loss of right to privacy. How do you respond to that?
What I noticed in the president's speech is that not once did he mention that in every abortion, an unborn child dies, a living, breathing, human being who is not going to be around anymore. The court, I believe, correctly decided or ruled that there is no such right to abortion in the Constitution. I know your previous speaker was talking about precedents, but the precedents is the U.S. Constitution, the laws that were on the books in the states prior to 1973. Roe v. Wade was an aberration. It was a grievous decision, and the court made the correct decision today.
Desire, deception, and a double cross. The Seduction, a deadly love story only Dateline and Keith Morrison can.
Versus today, but what is next on the agenda?
We are going to protect as many babies as we can, and we are going to help as many mothers as we can. We've got a lot of states that have come forward with various programs to help a woman take care of her child, support her child, health and wellness checkups, whatever she needs, and I expect to see a lot more of that. We are going to do what we can to make this country a pro-baby, pro-mom, pro-life country.
Well, we appreciate you sharing your thoughts today as well. Thank you. Let's get some final thoughts now. Let me go to Hallie first. Hallie, you had laid out in one of our earlier conversations this patchwork now of laws, and that picture is changing even as we're speaking right now.
Lester, it's such an important point because it is extraordinary how fast this is moving already, just since this decision has come down at 10 o'clock Eastern today. I think people often sometimes think, well, the levers of government work slowly. Not today, not after this. You already have multiple states now that in the course of just the last 3 hours have moved now
to outright ban abortion. So people in those states who woke up with one right are going to go to bed or eat lunch or have dinner under a different set of rights that they have access to. And I think that the speed at which this has moved is important to note because we don't see this often. We talked about how this day makes history. I think that's one of the reasons why. You're seeing on your screen now some of the places where abortions will not be accessible in states that have trigger laws. Not all of these states is this happening today or right away. In some states, it's, let's say, 30 days, et cetera. But over the course of the next month or so, you will see these laws either outright banning or restricting abortion go into place. The other piece of this as we look ahead to what's next is the political fight that is to come. And I think it is exemplified based on two perspectives that we've gotten in just today. One comes from former Vice President Mike Pence, who said in a statement that we must not rest until, as he says, the sanctity of life is restored to the center of law in every state in the land. Every state in the land. The Democratic National Committee is picking up on that. What specifically Mike Pence has said, and he said this is what's at stake in November. That is the view of Democrats, right? This fight now extends beyond what we've seen so far as it relates to abortion rights access. The people who would like to see anti-abortion law become the law of the land in every state will fight on that front. You will see on the federal and state level the pushback against it. I go back to what the inimitable Pete Williams said about 30 seconds into us getting this decision, which is we are in a divided country now. That feels exceptionally true today, Lester.
So then, Hallie, Yamiche, let me go to you very quickly on this. You know, as we look at the impact of this, we've heard a lot of that conversation, but it's one of those things that doesn't directly impact you until it directly impacts you. This is going to unfold, I would think, over not weeks, but months.
Certainly. And there are, you know, according to the Guttmacher Institute, that there are something like 26 states that are ready to ban or heavily restrict abortion, already having those ideas in place and those actions in place. I also know that in conversations with people who provide access, that it's going to be poor women and women of color who are going to be most impacted by this. They're going to be the women who have to get into their cars and drive 18 hours if you live in the South to get to an abortion clinic that may possibly give you help if you also have to end up on a wait list. I also talked to a group in Louisiana that said that it's not just going to be easy to go and travel. Now waiting lists are already sometimes 300 women, sometimes waiting weeks to get an abortion. So it's going to be a complicated landscape for those women. I also talked to the head of the Mississippi clinic at the center of this, and she said she's moving her clinic to New Mexico. So that tells you that if you are someone who is working with women in Mississippi, now the closest place is New Mexico. And we should also note that 1 in 4 women in this country before the age of 45 say that they've had an abortion. So this is a sweeping impact that we're going to see across the country. And NBC News polling shows that 60% of Americans, they want to see abortion be legal in some way in this country. So as we look at this landscape and this sea change, this generational change in abortion access, we have to really keep in mind who's going to be most impacted and how hard it's going to be in this country. My eye is also on the District of Columbia. While it's a very deeply blue place, there are going to be women in the District of Columbia who think maybe they're protected because they live in a blue city that may possibly face federal changes to their right to abortion. So this is really going to be a long conversation that we're going to have. And you're right to say that it's going to be weeks and months when we think about assessing how this is going to impact people.
All right, Yamiche, thank you very much. Let me bring back Chuck Todd in for some final thoughts. I wanted to get your comments really about some of what the president say. He mentioned Donald Trump's name and his role in three of these justices.
You know, it's interesting. Let's take a step back and just think about the consequential actions of this week. The 2 Supreme Court rulings that that undid. One law was 110 years old. This one is 50 years old. You have what former President Trump attempted to do to the democracy. We learned that in chilling detail all of the last couple of weeks. Yesterday, in particular, arguably 2 hours away from a massive constitutional crisis. Throw in what the divisiveness that Donald Trump has created in the immigration debate. And you really can't help but look back at 2016, that election, and the entrance of Donald Trump into our politics, and he really has sort of shattered a lot of the stability we had in American society. He has been the linchpin of shattering our stability on reproductive rights, our stability on immigration, our stability even in some ways, obviously, on the democracy. And we're in a rough place as a country and as a society. We're not just polarized. We're divided in ways that feel so fundamental, and you're not sure how we bring each other back. We are divided in our information silos. So, look, I'm very concerned about the fallout from all of what we've seen just this week. Former president could be put on trial. We're a tinderbox right now, and I think our elected leaders, particularly on the right, have put some blinders on and have not fully appreciated what's been unleashed on our society.
And on that thought, thank you, Chuck. That concludes our coverage of this historic ruling. I'm Lester Holt. I'll have much more, of course, this evening on NBC Nightly News. For now, we'll leave you with some of the reaction from outside the Supreme Court today on both sides of this divisive issue.
I see tears streaming down your face. What does this mean to you today?
It feels like a betrayal. It feels like my country doesn't love me and appreciate my body as a woman. I can't even chant because I can't say anything. It hurts.
So I was in the middle of praying when we found out the decision was made, and I'm overjoyed right now. There's honestly no words that can describe the way that I feel right now. I've been waiting for this for a long time, and I know other people have been waiting for this longer than I have. And I was definitely not expecting it to come this soon, but I'm very grateful it did. And
it's shocking. Like, how can this is something that women should have a right to? Like, I can't.
I'm excited, but we all, as if you can see the celebration, but we all know this is not where the work ends. This is where it begins, because from anyone you can ask, this is what we'll be working for the rest of our lives, to make abortion illegal, unthinkable, and unnecessary.